I woke up in a dark forest with a terrible smell all around me. When I tried to sit up, my hands sank into something soft, and pain shot through my whole body. I looked down and realized I was lying on top of a pile of dead bodies, with more corpses piled on my legs. A dead man's empty eyes stared right at me. I panicked and ran. After running until I collapsed under a big tree, I checked myself over. I was wearing torn, bloody rags, old-fashioned clothes, like something from ancient China. My body was covered in scabbed-over wounds, like I'd been whipped. But the surgical scar I'd had on my knee was gone. My leg hair was just fine peach fuzz. No beard either. This wasn't my body. I'd somehow transmigrated into the body of a teenager, maybe 14 or 15 years old. I sat there shivering in the cold, starving, complaining out loud about how I just wanted a bowl of instant noodles. Then a glowing screen appeared in front of me out of thin air, like a shopping interface. It showed my name and a balance of 12,580 yuan, which was exactly how much I had in my bank account back in my old life. Below that was a list of instant noodles I could buy. I tested it by asking for a handgun. The screen switched to showing pistols, but they all cost more than my entire balance, and bullets were sold separately. So that was out. Instead, I bought a bowl of pickled cabbage beef noodles for 5 yuan, a flat pan for 75, a bottle of water for 2, and a lighter for 1. I built a little campfire, set up the pan, and started boiling water for my noodles. While waiting, I kept shopping. I grabbed a cheap set of clothes for 580 yuan, a backpack for 360, a one-person tent with a sleeping pad for 180, and a machete with a sheath for 420. The machete was sharp enough to chop through a tree branch in one swing, even with my weak body. By the end of my first day in this world, I'd spent 1,623 yuan. Balance, 10,957. I barely slept that first night. I kept having nightmares about the mass grave and those dead, staring eyes. At dawn I packed up, grabbed my pan in one hand and machete in the other, and started walking through the forest with no idea where I was going. Every bird that flew overhead made me jump. I kept wondering if I'd landed in some fantasy world with monsters, but the 2 snakes I ran into were just normal snakes that slithered away from me. Maybe I'd just traveled back to ancient China. I wanted to find a river and follow it downstream to civilization, but after half a day, I hadn't found even a puddle. I bought 2 more bottles of water for 4 yuan, had some steamed buns and soy milk for breakfast costing 6 yuan, and I was still going in circles. Money was disappearing fast, and I had nothing to show for it. Then I spotted a mountain path with stone steps, clearly man-made. I forgot all about lunch and started climbing. When I looked back from halfway up, all I could see was endless forests surrounded by massive mountains. It felt hopeless. I reached the top by afternoon and found a cluster of old, thatched huts, completely abandoned. Spiderwebs and bugs everywhere. There was a small courtyard with 3 rooms, a main hall, a kitchen, and a bedroom, surrounded by a collapsed stick fence. Behind it, I counted 11 or 12 more ruined courtyards. At first, I thought it was an abandoned village, but then I found broken weapons and sun-bleached skulls on the ground. This had been a bandit hideout, and someone had wiped them out. While poking around, I found a broken piece of jade that used to be a sword guard. The moment I picked it up, the shopping screen popped up and offered to buy it back for 680 yuan. I sold it instantly, bringing my balance up to 11,595. That changed my thinking. If I couldn't find a way out of the mountains yet, why not stay here and search for more valuables? This courtyard was the most intact one, so I decided to make it my base. I set up my tent on the stone slab in front of the house and spent the rest of the daylight clearing weeds with my machete, piling them up to dry for firewood. I also found a bronze sword, but it was too rusted and broken to sell, only good as a poker for the fire. Feeling rich from the jade sale, I splurged and bought a roast suckling pig for 388 yuan. It turned out to be tiny, maybe 4 or 5 pounds, barely enough for one meal instead of the 3 I'd planned. But the smell was incredible. I bought a steel grill rack for another 50 yuan so it wouldn't fall into the fire and roasted it over the campfire. End of day 2. Balance, 11,157 yuan. I ate the whole roast pig last night, and it was so greasy I couldn't sleep. I ended up buying a bottle of plum juice for 3 yuan just to settle my stomach, and finally passed out around midnight. I slept through the morning. When I woke up, the sun was already high. I sat on the stone slab looking at the view, wishing I could afford a helicopter to fly out of here. For lunch, I bought a pound of braised pig head meat for 10 yuan and 2 bottles of Tsingtao beer for 7 yuan. Cheap and satisfying. I looked at the huge pile of weeds I'd cut yesterday and decided to just burn them instead of waiting for them to dry. I had the lighter, so starting the fire was easy, but the grass was still damp, and the whole mountaintop erupted in thick smoke like a signal beacon. I stared at it for a while, then shrugged. Nobody around to see it anyway. I was wrong about that. Miles away at the mass grave where I'd woken up, a group of about 20 villagers in ragged clothes had come to find the bodies of their family members. They'd been killed by Turkic raiders who came south to plunder and forced local people into slave labor, beating to death anyone who resisted. Among them was a young man around 16 or 17, hollow-eyed, sitting on the ground. An old man the villagers called Second Grandpa brought him water and told him to stay strong. The young man was called Dalong, the eldest son of some family, and he'd come looking for his younger brother, a boy named Yunfei. That was me. They hadn't found my body among the dead, and nobody knew if that was good news or bad. Second Grandpa had lost his own youngest son. 9 bodies lay on makeshift stretchers, wrapped in straw mats, ready to be carried home. Then someone spotted the column of smoke rising from my mountaintop. The villagers figured Turkic raiders were up there robbing a tomb. My brother Dalong stared at that smoke and felt something pulling him toward it, a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. Second Grandpa tried to stop him, warning it was too dangerous, begging him not to get himself killed when he was the last male left in our family. But Dalong apologized, asked the old man to look after our mother, and took off running toward my mountain. I had no idea any of this was happening. I was just sitting there drinking beer, not knowing that the smoke from my little weed fire was about to bring my brother straight to me. I spent the afternoon chopping weeds around the huts, hoping to find more jade or valuables. No luck, just more human bones. I was starting to regret setting up camp in this creepy place and was thinking about buying a compass and trying to leave the mountains tomorrow. Then a huge flock of birds burst out of the forest below, flying in a line heading straight toward me. I panicked and dove into my tent. After listening for a while and hearing nothing dangerous, I peeked out with my pan and machete ready. Someone was coming up the mountain, drawn by my smoke. I quickly bought a pair of binoculars for 200 yuan and looked down. It was a young man in rough cotton clothes, definitely Chinese. And he was moving insanely fast, leaping up steep slopes like it was nothing. I started freaking out, wondering if I'd landed in some kind of martial arts world. Then I heard him shouting my name. Yunfei? Yunfei. He reached the top in no time. He was a bit older than me, dark-skinned, muscular, with sharp features. I pointed my machete at him and asked who he was. He looked confused, then flicked me on the forehead so fast I didn't even see it coming. I dropped everything and rolled on the ground in pain. He called me little brother and asked why I didn't recognize my own big brother. I had no idea who he was. This body's memories hadn't transferred to me. He checked a birthmark on my inner thigh, a small dark red crescent, and confirmed I was really his brother, the one they called Erlang. Then he grabbed my shoulders with tears in his eyes and asked if I remembered our mother, our little sister. I shook my head. I couldn't exactly tell him the truth, that his real brother was dead and I was a stranger from another world living in his body. In ancient times, they'd probably burn me as a demon. So I played the amnesia card. I told him I woke up in a pile of corpses, was terrified, and couldn't remember anything after that. He bought it completely. Turns out he'd just come from that same mass grave looking for me. He was overjoyed I was alive and wanted to take me home right away, to our mother and our younger sister, who apparently adored me. I figured this worked out perfectly. I needed a way out of the mountains, and now I had a guide. Plus, this guy had run all this way just on a hunch that I might be alive. Having a brother like that didn't seem bad at all. I asked him to wait while I grabbed my stuff. End of day 3. Balance, 10,937 yuan. On the way down the mountain, I tried to learn as much as I could about my new family by peppering my brother with questions. Our family had 4 people, no other relatives. But he got annoyed with all my talking and told me to keep quiet because the mountain paths were dangerous at night and wild animals might hear us. Having him beside me made a huge difference. He was tall, strong, and clearly knew how to fight. I felt safe for the first time since waking up in this world. I offered him a bottle of water. He took it but couldn't figure out how to open it, turning red with embarrassment. I showed him how to twist the cap off. He was amazed by how well made the bottle was and asked where I got it. I lied smoothly, saying I'd found a bag full of useful things, including the machete I'd given him. He didn't question it and stuck the half-finished bottle in his waistband like a canteen. We walked fast through the night until the moon was high. Then he pointed ahead at a small village and said we were home. Home. In my previous life, my parents abandoned me when I was little. I grew up in an orphanage. I'd never really had a home. He pointed to a courtyard at the east end of the village where a small fire was still burning. Through my binoculars, I could see two figures, one big, one small, sitting by the light. I learned a few things along the way. This was the Tang dynasty. Li Shimin had just taken the throne, and the Turkic people had invaded from the north, raiding all the way down to Xinjiang. Our mother was at home sewing shoe soles for the army. It was a labor duty ordered by the government. When we got close, the village dogs started barking. Then a tiny girl came charging out of the gate, crying and running straight at me. Second brother. Second brother, she slammed into my arms, sobbing and asking why I'd left her for so long. She was Ruhue, my little sister, 4.5 years old, with 2 little pigtails. I didn't know her at all, but her crying got to me. My eyes went red and I held her head, promising I'd never leave again. Then my mother came. My brother had already whispered to her about my memory loss. She looked at the whip scars on my arms and started crying, saying it was a blessing I'd come home alive. I called her Mother and told her not to worry, that my memories would come back slowly. In my old life, I never had any of this. No mother, no brother, no little sister hugging my neck. Now I had a whole family, and sitting together in that small courtyard under the moonlight, I started to feel like maybe this new life wasn't so bad. Having a family felt strangely natural. I carried my little sister Ruhue around the courtyard, checking out my new home. It was run down, thatched huts with holes that let the wind through, mosquitoes everywhere, mice running across the floor, cockroaches crawling around openly. The yard was decent-sized, maybe 200 or 300 square meters, with 3 rooms, a main hall with a small bamboo bed, a bedroom I shared with my brother that had 2 bamboo beds, and a bow with bamboo arrows on the wall, and a basic kitchen stuffed with firewood. My mother started making us soup with flat noodles when she heard we hadn't eaten. My brother told her to use less flour and more vegetable leaves. Food was scarce. He was the family's only provider, hunting in the mountains with crude tools to trade for supplies. A dangerous life where many hunters never came back. I told her to use all the flour, saying I had food in my bag to last us days. My brother got annoyed, warning me the Turkic raiders had emptied every granary in the county and there was nowhere to buy grain, even with money. He was a penny pincher, but he had good reason. I gave Ruhue a lollipop. She loved it and asked if she could share one with her friend Yaya. I said of course. My brother scolded me, saying that candy was priceless here and could be traded for enough flatbread to feed us for half a month. He wasn't wrong, but I knew my situation. I could buy more any time. When the noodle soup was ready, we each got a bowl, with my mother and Ruhue sharing one. My brother took a sip and asked if we were out of salt. My mother said it ran out yesterday, and she'd have to borrow some vinegar cloth from second grandpa's family until the market reopened. I tasted the soup. Completely bland. Yesterday, I'd been eating roast suckling pig, and now this? No way. I pulled up the shopping screen and found instant noodle seasoning packets, half a yuan each. I bought 10 of each flavor, 100 packets total, for 50 yuan. I pulled out 3 packets from my bag and showed everyone how to tear them open and pour the powder into the soup. The moment I stirred mine, the bowl exploded with the smell of spicy beef noodles. Ruhue broke free from our mother and dove into my lap, begging for a taste. One sip and her eyes went wide with wonder. My mother and brother were suspicious though. My mother said these were precious spices and asked if the bag I'd found belonged to someone important. My brother gripped the machete at his waist nervously, worried it might be stolen from some powerful person. I waved it off and lied without blinking. I told them it was just stuff left behind by some Western traders who'd fled the area, and as long as we kept quiet, nobody would know. They looked at each other, then both nodded and agreed to keep the backpack a secret. If only they knew, there was no previous owner. Everything came from a magical shopping screen that only I could see. By the next morning, the whole village knew I was alive. People came by to congratulate my mother and to look at the kid who cheated death. I learned more about what had happened. The Turkic raiders had grabbed 30 men from our village as forced labor. 22 bodies had been found so far. I was the only one who came back alive. Second Grandpa Chow came by. He looked ancient, but was probably only in his 40s. Hard living ages people fast here. His youngest son Dashan had been my body's best friend, and now he was dead. Second Grandpa asked me to come to the burial that afternoon and throw a handful of dirt on the grave. I nodded. I'd lain in the same mass grave as him. The least I could do was show up. After he left, the mood at home got heavy. Almost every family in the village had lost a man. My mother told us we were the luckiest household. My brother had been out hunting when the raiders came, and I'd somehow survived. She told us to visit the neighbors and help where we could, since everyone was holding funerals. My brother wanted to go hunting. He was the only hunter left in the village, and without meat, people would be too weak to work. The Turkic raiders had cleaned out the grain stores, so everyone was surviving on wild vegetables. I had an idea. Instead of hunting, we could catch fish. There was a stream near the east end of the village. My brother laughed and said I couldn't catch a single fish in an hour with a bamboo pole. I told him I wasn't talking about a fishing rod. I'm in a net. A proper sticky net that tangles fish so they can't escape. I bought one from the shop for 50 yuan. My brother went and brought back 2 helpers, Dabeo, the carpenter's son, and Chonyang, a girl built like a bull who was stronger than most men. My brother swam the net across the stream, about 16 or 17 meters wide, and held one end on the far bank, while Chonyang held the other side. Then Dabeo and I went upstream and beat the water with bamboo poles to chase the fish downstream into the net. When we came back half an hour later and tried to pull the net in, Dabeo couldn't budge it. He thought it was stuck on rocks. I pointed at the net poking above the water. It was packed with fish, all tangled up and thrashing. Chonyang shouted in amazement. The nets people used in this era were just big scoops that fish could easily slip out of. My modern sticky net was something they'd never seen. Between the seasoning packets from yesterday and the fishing net, I'd spent 100 yuan. Balance, 10,833. The stream near our village was called Mulan Creek, connected to the Wei River. It never dried up even in droughts because our village sat low in a valley. Plenty of fish lived in it, but the villagers were mountain people who preferred hunting and didn't know how to make nets. Their handmade hooks were too big for most fish anyway. We pulled in a massive haul, but I started throwing the small ones back. My brother, Dabeo, and Chonyang were furious. They thought I was wasting food. Chonyang ran to get Second Grandpa to stop me. He came charging over and snatched a fish out of my hand. Then he saw the water pit we'd dug nearby, packed full of big thrashing fish, and went speechless. I held up a palm-sized grass carp and explained. We can't drain the pond to catch the fish, I told him. If we take the babies too, there won't be any fish to breed next year. Keep the big ones, throw back the small ones. He thought about it and agreed completely. Even applied the same logic to hunting. Take the grown ones, let the young ones reproduce. Within an hour, every household in the village had 2 big fish to take home. My mother and some women cleaned the leftover fish by the stream, split them open with bamboo poles, and hung them up to dry in our yard. After all that, we went to Second Grandpa's house for Dashan's burial. I covered my nose going in. The smell of death was everywhere in the village with over 20 bodies waiting to be buried. But when I stepped into the yard, something felt off. The smell was weaker than it should have been. Dashan had been dead for days. Why wasn't the stench worse? It hit me all at once. I ran to the body and pulled off the straw mat covering him. His face was pale and his lips were cracked and bleeding, but his skin was still warm. I pried open his eyelids. His pupils contracted when I pressed and expanded when I let go. I pinched his finger hard and held it. After a moment, it turned purple with blood. When I released it, the color went back to normal. I remembered reading about cases of apparent death online. There were 3 simple tests. Check if the pupils respond to pressure, check for faint breathing, and check if blood still circulates to squeezed fingers. I'd done 2 of the 3. No death spots on his skin, no real decay smell. Dashan wasn't dead. He was in some kind of suspended state, a false death. I looked up at Second Grandpa and shouted, "Get him inside now? He's alive. Dashan is alive." When I told Second Grandpa that Dashan was alive, he couldn't believe it. I shouted for everyone to boil water and prepare salt water, then carried Dashan inside and laid him on a bamboo bed. I tried to remember everything I'd ever read about emergency first aid. First, clear the airway. I called Debeo in to hold Dashin's neck steady while I checked his mouth for anything blocking it. Nothing but bad breath. Good. I grabbed his shoulders and shook him hard, yelling his name over and over. That's supposed to wake people in lighter states of unconsciousness, but Dashin had been out for 2 days. Nothing happened. Second Grandpa came in looking hopeful, then saw me slapping his son's body and nearly lost it. But he held back, probably out of respect for the friendship between Dashin and the original owner of my body. Then I remembered, the philtrum point, the spot between the nose and upper lip. I pressed it hard with my knuckle. A tiny puff of air hit my finger from Dashin's nose. I needed to confirm it. I pulled a thread from the bedsheet and held it under his nose, telling everyone to hold their breath and stay still. The thread moved. Debeo gasped. I placed it right at his nostrils to make sure it wasn't just air from my own movement. The thread lifted and fell off his face, pushed by Dashin's breathing. He's alive, Debeo shouted. Second Grandpa saw his son's eyelashes flutter, then watched his chest start rising and falling with real, visible breaths. The old man grabbed Dashin and sobbed, crying that the Chow family line wasn't finished after all. I checked Dashin's pulse, steady. His eyes were starting to show blood flow again. He was going to be okay. My brother came in with a clay pot of salt water. He'd collected every bit of salt in the village to make it. I told Chonyang to feed Dashin a bowl right away and another in 4 hours, since he hadn't eaten or drunk anything in days and desperately needed fluids. My brother didn't say a word to me. He just squeezed my shoulder and smiled. I could see he was proud. Word spread fast. The whole village gathered outside Second Grandpa's house. My mother came running with Ruhui, who immediately leaped into my arms as usual. My mother asked if I'd really brought Dashin back to life. I made sure to correct that loudly enough for everyone to hear. I didn't resurrect him. He was never actually dead. It was a false death, where breathing and pulse become so faint they're undetectable. The real clue was that his body hadn't started to smell after several days, even in this heat. A truly dead person would stink within a day or two. I said this on purpose so nobody would start thinking I was some kind of miracle worker. Second Grandpa came out beaming and joked that he'd nearly buried his own living son. I told him to keep feeding Dashin salt water and to make him fish soup later to help him recover. By the time we got home, it was late afternoon, and I was starving. People in the Tang dynasty only eat 2 meals a day, and I'd had nothing since a bowl of noodle soup that morning. I told my brother to grab some fish, and I'd make sour pickled cabbage fish. Ruhui backed me up, yelling at him to hurry because her tummy was flat as a pancake. My brother looked to our mother for support, but she just kept sewing and ignored him. Being the eldest is a thankless job. He pulled 2 arm-length grass carp from the water jar in the corner, 15 or 16 pounds between them, and there were still over a dozen big ones left. We'd be eating fish for a while. My mother asked how I wanted to cook them, and I told my brother to fillet the meat into thin slices. She thought I meant to eat it raw, which was apparently a thing here called fish kwai. I had no idea what that was. I told her to trust me. I ducked into the bedroom and bought a packet of sour cabbage fish seasoning for 30 yuan and a big bottle of cooking oil for 40 yuan. I ripped off all the packaging and burned it in the fire before anyone could see modern Chinese labels. My brother pointed at the oil jug and asked if it came from my bag. I told him everything I had belonged to the whole family, so stop asking. Our mother shot him a look that said the same thing. Ruhui just wanted to know if she could drink it. I laughed, gave her a bottle of iced tea instead for 5 yuan, and told her to get some bowls so we could all share. Our mother grew vegetables in the back garden: Chinese cabbage, radish, spinach, okra, garlic, scallions, and even some peppercorn bushes. All organic, full of bug holes, but big and juicy. I grabbed a head of cabbage and a radish, perfect for a fish stew base, and washed them at the creek. When I got back, the fish bone broth was already turning milky white. I dumped in the seasoning packet along with the sliced cabbage and radish. The whole yard filled with an incredible sour, savory smell. Then my brother walked over with the sliced fish, and I was genuinely stunned. Every piece was paper-thin and translucent in the sunset light. He'd even pulled out all the tiny bones. Grass carp are full of them, and I'd been worried Ruhui couldn't eat it safely. He just glanced at me like it was nothing special. Our mother explained he'd been hunting and butchering since he was a kid, completely self-taught. He could deb one a whole wild boar. The butcher in town had tried to recruit him as an apprentice. I divided the fish slices into 4 bowls, then ladled boiling broth over them to cook the meat just right, tender but still firm. I added soft cabbage and radish slices, sprinkled scallions and garlic on top, then heated oil with peppercorns until fragrant and poured it sizzling over everything. The bowls looked incredible, glistening with chili oil and peppercorns. My mother and brother stared in disbelief, partly at how good it looked, partly at how much oil I'd used. They would have scolded me if they hadn't spotted the full jug still sitting by the stove. They couldn't resist for long. My mother said it was the best thing she'd ever tasted in her life. Ruhui gave up on chopsticks entirely and just grabbed fish with her little hands, cheeks stuffed full, terrified someone might steal her food. My brother inhaled his bowl in seconds and was already picking through the pot for leftover fish heads and bones. Sitting there watching my family eat together, everyone happy, grease on their lips, it felt like something I'd been missing my whole life. Chonyang woke me at dawn. Dashin was awake. I rushed over and found him smiling weakly at me from the bamboo bed. I checked his forehead and pupils. Everything looked normal. His lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration, so I told him not to try talking. I suggested he start with liquid food, fish soup with the meat mashed up fine so his body could absorb it. I sent my brother home to grab a seasoning packet to add some flavor, since the village was still out of salt and bland broth wouldn't help his appetite. After leaving Dashin to rest, I turned to a problem that had been bugging me for 2 days. There were no toilets in this village. Men could manage, but my mother and little sister had to squat behind bushes. Snakes lived in those bushes. That was unacceptable. I'd stayed up the night before drawing a design on a sheet of paper, a proper flush toilet system. A public outhouse with a water tank on top, a pull chain to flush waste down pipes, running 100 meters out to a cesspit the villagers could use as fertilizer. I went to see Debao's father, Wang Lao, the village carpenter. He studied my design and said the structure was doable, but asked about the pipes. Wood would rot. Debao piped up with the answer: clay pipes. Have second grandpa fire ceramic tubes, connect them together, and bury them underground. Both his father and I agreed that was perfect. Uncle Six refused payment for the work, saying it benefited the whole village. He'd only accept meals. I told him to hire some helpers, and I'd pay their wages and feed everyone. He rounded up workers, and we planned to start that same afternoon. I ran home and bought supplies from the shop: 200 jean bags of flour for 360 yuan, yeast for 20, and 20 jean of white sugar for 120. My mother and brother had stopped asking where things came from. They just pretended not to notice. Our cover story was that the family had stockpiled supplies before the raids. My mother helped me mix dough without batting an eye. My brother silently stashed the leftover flour under the bed. Ruhui snuck a fistful of sugar into her mouth when she thought nobody was looking. Day 5. Balance: 10,263 yuan. Ruhui sat beside me listing off every person who'd gone to help build the public toilet. Uncle Six had half the village out there digging on the East Hill. My brother was at the fire eating nonstop. I'd lost count of how many he'd had. We loaded a cart with steamed buns and fish soup and pushed it up to the construction site. I'd picked the East Hill because it sat higher than the surrounding farmland, giving us a natural slope for the waste pipes to drain into a cesspit below. The creek ran along the north side, making water easy to fetch. The toilet was closest to my house, though, so I felt a little guilty about calling it a public project. When I called everyone over to eat, the villagers were so careful with the food it broke my heart. Uncle Six took one bun and was amazed at how soft it was. He'd never seen anything like steamed bread made with yeast, only the tough flat cakes they called steamed cakes. The women ate one bun each and wrapped the second in leaves to bring home to their families. I tried to tell them I'd made plenty and more were being steamed at home right now. Uncle Six got angry at Debao and asked how many he'd eaten. Debao held up one finger, then quietly added, 10. Uncle Six nearly exploded. I stepped in and explained we had 120 buns total, with more coming. Chonyang shoved a bowl of fish soup into Uncle Six's hands and told everyone to stop being so polite. Finally, he agreed to 5 buns per person, with extras counting as wages. After lunch, Uncle Six showed me the site. The outhouse was 10 meters long and 5 meters wide, split into men's and women's sides, 20 stalls total. Plenty for a village of under 200 people. Then he mentioned something that hit me hard. Second grandpa was making the clay pipes, 600 sections needed. and he'd hired 20 workers out of his own pocket. He'd spent the money he'd been saving for Dashin's future wedding. He was doing it to repay me for saving his son. I felt awful. I should have thought about paying for his side too. But I knew if I tried to stop him now, he'd refuse. This was about pride and gratitude for him. So I decided I'd find other ways to pay him back without hurting his feelings. I stayed at the site until dark. When I got home, I told my mother to steam an extra 100 buns tomorrow to send over to second grandpa's crew. My brother came back from the creek carrying Ruhue, both of them with wet hair from bathing. I looked toward the stream and sighed. After the toilet was done, I'd need to build a bathhouse. Then proper houses. Then roads. Then figure out how to earn money. I'd thought this would be a relaxing life, but somehow my to-do list kept growing. Still, 5 days in, I loved this. A kind mother, a tough brother, a sweet little sister. Maybe someday I'd find a wife too. Life could be really good here. Then my brother flicked me on the forehead again for daydreaming. I hit the ground rolling and screaming while my mother and Ruhue laughed their heads off. I kicked the morning dew off my cloth shoes and thought about buying proper boots. My brother was already stuffing his face with buns. We'd steamed 300 the night before, piled up on the stone slab for Dabeo and Chonyang to distribute to the work crews. Today we had a special mission. I'd come up with a plan to explain where all my supplies were coming from. We loaded 2 empty water jars onto a handcart, covered them with straw mats so it looked like we were hauling a heavy load, and told everyone we were taking dried fish to the county town to trade for supplies. Uncle Six and the villagers bought it completely. They even felt sorry for us, thinking we were risking a run-in with Turkic raiders just to trade our own food for grain. That guilt actually worked in my favor. It made the cover story more believable. We walked until mid-morning, then stopped in a hidden valley. My brother turned his back without being asked. He'd figured out the routine. I pulled out my backpack from the water jar and went shopping. For my brother and me, 4 sets of Hawaiian shirts and beach shorts, 240 yuan. For my mother, 2 nice embroidered summer outfits, for 120 yuan. For Ruhue, 2 cute monster and Ultraman costume sets plus sneakers and socks, 660 yuan total. Girls deserve nice things. Then food. 200 jin of flour for 720 yuan, 100 jin of the cheapest rice for 100, and 50 jin of coarse salt for 40. I loaded everything onto the cart, then felt bad for making my brother stand there the whole time. I bought him a bottle of Red Star Erguo 2, strong Chinese liquor, 56 proof, for 15 yuan. His face lit up when I told him it was alcohol. He'd been this excited only once before, when I gave him the machete. He twisted off the cap, took a huge gulp, and nearly coughed his lungs out. Then he carefully screwed the cap back on and hugged the bottle to his chest, grinning like Ruhue with her first lollipop. We had to kill time, so we wouldn't return suspiciously early. I asked him why he'd never joined the army with fighting skills like his. He said he'd thought about enlisting to kill Turkic soldiers and avenge me after I was captured. But once I came home alive, he couldn't leave our mother and sister alone. To pass more time, I asked if he could write. He said our father had taught us before he died, and I'd been the better student. He picked up a stick and slowly scratched out 3 characters in the dirt. I leaned over to read them. Shi Junmai. Shi Junmai. My heart stopped. I knew that name. From the Ziji Tongjian, one of the most famous historical records in Chinese history. Shi Junmai, the Tang Dynasty military officer who led 120 elite cavalry to crush the Tuyuhun chancellor and killed 3 of his brothers in a single raid. My big brother, the guy who ate 10 buns for breakfast and coughed on liquor, was going to become a legendary general. Day spending, 2,195 yuan. Balance, 8,068. I told my brother he should join the army. He asked why. I couldn't exactly say, because you're going to become a famous general in the history books, so I just laughed awkwardly and dropped it. The trip home took forever. The cart was heavy, and I was useless at pushing. Going downhill, I nearly tipped us over. My brother did most of the pulling. We didn't reach the village until after 3 in the afternoon. My mother had been standing at the village entrance holding Ruhue since who knows when. She'd been too worried to sleep properly and had missed seeing us off that morning. Ruhue spotted me from far away and came sprinting over. Up on the east hill, the workers saw our loaded cart and stared at all the grain with hungry eyes. Someone asked where we'd found a place to trade for food. I put on a show, pulling back the straw mats and sighing about how we'd traded 12 dan of dried fish for barely 4 dan of grain. A terrible deal, 3-1. The villagers clicked their tongues in sympathy. That was exactly what I wanted them to think. Then I announced that every household could come collect a small jar of salt, and workers on the toilet project would get double. Uncle Six looked at my mother to check if she approved. She didn't object, so he happily spread the word. When we got home, the first thing my brother did was run inside to hide his bottle of ergwo. He came back out trying to look casual. I teased him about it, and he glared at me. Ruhui clung to me the moment we walked through the gate. I knew she was out of lollipops again. I pretended to reach into my pocket while secretly buying 2 more, then handed them over. I showed my mother the new clothes I'd bought for everyone. When she found the embroidered blouse I'd picked for her, her eyes went red. Ruhui grabbed her little monster costume and wanted to put it on immediately. I made her take a bath first. After dinner, we started distributing salt. My mother filled small clay jars, about the size of half a soda can, and dumped each portion onto a lotus leaf. Villagers lined up outside our gate. Old man Tian Dachuan, the village elder, helped keep order. 35 households besides ours. Then some villagers in the back called out, asking if they could work too, not for extra salt, but for steamed buns. They'd seen the construction crews eating big fluffy buns every day, and they were desperate. Old man Tian looked embarrassed on their behalf, but I understood. Every family was out of grain. I couldn't feed 100 people 5 buns a day, but I could put some of them to work. I told Grandpa Tian I needed 10 people, 4 to help with fishing and 6 to gut fish and make dried fish. Same pay as the construction workers. He looked disappointed. Only 10 out of 100? So I added a second project. I wanted to clear farmland on the riverbank between Mulan Creek and the East Hill. Unlimited workers welcome. Pay. 2 buns a day per person, a bowl of porridge, and a plate of greens. No children, though. Grandpa Tian got excited when I mentioned farming. I told him about the crops I wanted to grow: grapes, tomatoes, potatoes, corn, peppers. He'd only heard of grapes, since the others hadn't been brought to China yet, but he didn't care. I offered him the job of foreman for the farming project, same rank as second grandpa and Uncle Six, and he left grinning. With the villagers sorted, I grabbed Ruhui, now dressed in her little monster costume, and walked over to the East Hill to check on the toilet. My brother was in the yard swinging his machete so fast I couldn't follow the movements. My mother tagged along in her new embroidered outfit, clearly wanting to show it off. The outhouse was nearly finished and looked great. Simple but smart. Wooden walls 2 meters high for privacy, then a meter of open ventilation space above, then the roof with a big wooden water tank on top. The men's side had squat stalls and a urinal trough. The women's side had individual stalls with wooden doors that bolted from the inside. Outside, there was a hand-washing station fed by bamboo pipes from the water tank. Uncle Six had built a little valve mechanism based on my description, basically a wooden faucet. I'd contributed a rubber gasket to keep it from dripping. Dashin was there too, already hauling heavy clay pipes around despite barely being recovered. I scolded him for pushing himself, but he just gave me a dopey grin. Second grandpa said Dashin had eaten over a dozen buns for breakfast and was doing fine. The pipe burial was almost done. Villagers shoveled dirt back over the trench in no time. Then Dashin, Debeo, and Chonyang hauled bucket after bucket of creek water up the stairs to fill the tank. Second grandpa was amazed by the staircase design. He'd never seen one before, only ladders. Village buildings were all single-story thatched huts. Time for the test run. I sent Debeo and Chonyang inside since they were eager, and took second grandpa and Uncle Six down the slope to watch the cesspit end of the pipe. Both old men looked disappointed. They'd wanted to be the first users. Before we even reached the bottom, we heard water rushing through the buried pipes, then splashing in the cesspit. It worked perfectly. I looked at the riverbank beside the cesspit, 70 or 80 mu of flat land covered in reeds and weeds. That was where I planned to clear the new farmland. The cesspit would provide fertilizer right next door. I slapped Uncle Six on the shoulder and winked at second grandpa. I invited them both to my house that evening for a drink. Good liquor, but they had to come quietly since I didn't have much. Their eyes lit up instantly. 2 middle-aged men who looked 60, bonding over the promise of booze. They nodded in perfect sync. I handed Ruhui to my mother and ran up the hill to try the toilet myself. The toilet was officially done, and the whole village went crazy over it. People who didn't even need to go were lining up just to try the flush mechanism. Dashin and Debeo hauled dozens of loads of water to the tank until Chonyang finally stepped in and declared every household had to take turns filling it. Fair enough. That evening, second Grandpa and Uncle Six came over for dinner as promised. My brother poured their drinks, looking sour because he thought I'd taken the bottle I'd given him. I'd actually bought a new one and poured it into a clay jug, but I didn't tell him that. I made a spread: pan-fried dried fish, chopped pepper fish head, cold mixed vegetable strips, and oil-braised river prawns that villagers had brought us. Big wild ones you'd only find in deep mountains in the modern era. Over drinks, I asked second Grandpa about how the villagers made their living. He ran through the list. Grandpa Tian was a vegetable farmer who sold at the county market, but it had been closed for 2 months, so his crops were rotting in the ground. Second Grandpa himself was a potter who made jars and water crocks. A man called Willow 3 was a local teacher and letter writer. Uncle Six was the most successful, a skilled carpenter who'd worked on jobs in the county town. I told Uncle Six I was serious about building a house and wanted him to look at my drawings. He agreed, asking only for some liquor to use as gifts once the market reopened. I promised him all the drinks he wanted after the house was done. Then I noticed second Grandpa looking left out. My mother discreetly stepped on my foot under the table. She was right. I'd just offered Uncle Six a big job and left second Grandpa with nothing, even though he'd spent Dashin's wedding savings helping me. People don't mind being poor, but they mind being treated unequally. I quickly shifted the conversation. I asked about Grandpa Tian's vegetables going to waste and why nobody made pickles to preserve them. Second Grandpa said pickling was a losing gamble. It used huge amounts of salt, and 9 out of 10 jars failed and went rotten. Only rich merchants could afford to try. That shocked me. I knew from my old life that proper pickles barely need any salt, just 2 to 4%. The real preservation comes from lactic acid bacteria fermenting in an airtight environment, not from salt. If their success rate was only 10%, they were clearly doing something fundamentally wrong. Probably letting raw water or oil contaminate the jars, or using way too much salt and not enough fermentation time. This was something I could fix. And if second Grandpa could make the clay pickling jars, Grandpa Tian could supply the vegetables, and I could teach them the right technique. Everyone would have work and something to trade. I looked at second Grandpa and grinned. Maybe you should go get Grandpa Tian. I walked out of the house in my new Hawaiian shirt and beach shorts feeling great, until I saw my brother wearing the exact same outfit. Same clothes, but he had bulging muscles and bronze skin while I was a pale skeleton with visible ribs. Worse, he was wearing straw sandals my mother had handmade, and they looked way cooler than my knockoff sneakers. I threw a fit and demanded my own pair. My mother looked at my perfectly good modern shoes, then at my brother's falling apart sandals, and clearly thought I was insane. But she pointed me to a stash under the bed. I swapped into the straw flip-flops immediately, unbuttoned my shirt halfway, and strutted around the yard like I was on a fashion runway. My brother looked ready to kick me into a wall. My mother mentioned that Grandpa Tian and second Grandpa had come looking for me while I was bathing. They'd gone to the pottery workshop and wanted me to come by. It had to be about the pickle business. Last night, the moment I'd mentioned I knew a foolproof method for making pickles, both old men had jumped at it. In this era, 9 out of 10 jars of pickles failed, so only rich merchants dared try. But I knew the real technique: low salt, proper fermentation, absolutely no raw water or oil contamination. The ingredients were cheap, especially since I was supplying the salt. For them, it was practically free money. The real gold mine was timing. Winter was 2 or 3 months away, and during the cold months when no fresh vegetables grew, pickles became incredibly expensive. Rich families in the county would pay top prices. We had plenty of time to build up stock. When I arrived at second Grandpa's place in my flip-flops, the yard was packed with people, mostly women in their 20s and 30s, with only a few older men. The Turkic raids had taken almost all the young men from the village. Second Grandpa had already prepared the clay. Grandpa Tian had picked, washed, and sliced over a dozen baskets of vegetables and laid them out to dry on the hillside. Everyone was just waiting for me. I pulled out my design sheet for the pickle jars. Second Grandpa marveled at the paper first, then studied the drawings. A charcoal sketch of a standard pickling jar with detailed close-ups of the lid and the rim. The rim was the key part. It needed a water seal groove around the top, so the lid could sit in a ring of water, creating an airtight seal that let fermentation gases escape without letting air in. Second, Grandpa understood everything immediately and said he could make it. He even asked if Dashin could come learn my drawing technique. He vowed to stay up all night and fire 50 jars so we could start pickling the next day. The workers were thrilled. They didn't fully understand the business, but they knew it meant steady meals of steamed buns. I asked where Uncle Six was. Grandpa Tian pointed toward the village entrance, where Uncle Six was already digging the foundation for the pickle workshop with a crew. He'd started without being asked, planning to have the foundation done today and the walls up tomorrow. I looked over at him and grinned. I'd somehow surrounded myself with people even more impatient than I was. Feeding nearly 300 buns a day to all the work crews was bleeding me dry. A bag of flour lasted one day, 50 jean at 3.6 yuan per jean. That's 180 yuan gone every morning. So my brother and I made another fake trip to the county, coming back with 500 jean of flour. Cost 1,800 yuan. I checked my balance and winced. Balance 6,125 yuan. I needed to start making money instead of just spending it. I'd been hiding in this valley building things, but hadn't taken a single step toward earning anything back. On the way home, I secretly read 2 booklets I'd bought, a Tang Dynasty chronology for 20 yuan and a map of China. I worked out our position. Xiago village sat between Jingyang County and the capital Chang'an, with the Wei River and its branches cutting across the land like natural moats. The Turkic army was camped north of Jingyang with hundreds of thousands of troops, but the rivers were blocking them from marching south in full force. Only small raiding parties had been crossing to loot villages. According to the history book, Li Shimin had been emperor for 9 days, and in 6 more days the Turkic forces would attack Jialing County to the east, where the river was narrower. Our area south of the rivers was actually relatively safe. I was muttering all this to myself when my brother snapped me out of it. We'd reached a steep slope and needed to push the heavy cart up together. At the top, we found trouble. For big, bearded Turkic soldiers were sitting on the stone platform with their horses, saddlebags stuffed with loot from raiding villages. My heart nearly stopped. I frantically searched the shop for weapons. Couldn't afford a gun, so I bought a titanium alloy short knife for 400 yuan and gripped it in my pocket, palm drenched in sweat. I counted them and whispered to my brother. For men, could he handle it? He tightened the machete at his waist, gave me a calm look, and walked straight at them. The Turkic men cursed in their language and pulled long swords from their horses. I hid behind the cart, terrified. These were grown warriors, and I was in the body of a 14-year-old. Then my brother moved. That same blur I'd seen the first day he found me on the mountain. One slice. The leader grabbed his throat as blood sprayed everywhere. The other 3 froze in shock. They'd never met a Tang civilian who fought back, let alone attacked first. 2 of them grabbed bows and ran for the tree line. The third charged my brother with a sword. I screamed a warning. If those archers got into the forest, we were dead. My brother dodged the charging man's swing and took his head off in a single stroke. The head rolled to my feet. I dropped to my knees and threw up. He glanced back to make sure I was okay, then crouched low and launched himself at the 2 fleeing archers with that impossible speed. 15 steps in an instant. Before either could draw their bows, 2 more cuts. Both dead. For Turkic soldiers, gone in seconds. I was still throwing up from the sight of that severed head while my brother dragged the 4 bodies into the bushes. Then he turned to stare at the 4 horses loaded with saddlebags full of loot, looking torn between wanting them and fearing trouble. I walked over and patted a big chestnut horse on the neck. I told him we were taking them. Our village didn't have a single horse or even a donkey. We couldn't just leave them. He was worried it would bring danger to the village, but I convinced him. I couldn't explain that I knew from history books the Turkic threat would be resolved soon through a treaty at the Wei River, so I just told him to trust me. While he tied the horses to our cart, I was grinning at the shopping screen flashing nonstop in front of me. The 4 Turkic soldiers had been carrying 21 liang of gold in an embroidered pouch. The system offered to buy it back for 210,000 yuan, gold with impurities, priced at about 200 yuan per gram. There was also 70 liang of silver, but the system wouldn't buy that back, probably because silver was too cheap in the modern world. I hit the recycle button. Balance, 215,725 yuan. I actually screamed with joy. My brother looked over, saw me cackling at the gold pouch, and just shook his head and smiled. He had 70 liang of silver on his back and was plenty happy himself. Between the horses, the gold, and the silver, this one encounter had transformed us from dirt poor to genuinely wealthy. I bought another bottle of erguo too, and we passed it back and forth on the way home, both of us in the best mood since I'd arrived in this world. My brother asked how we'd explain 4 war horses to the village. I said we'd tell everyone we sold one of our fishing nets. Those things were clearly valuable and nobody would question it. He pointed out the net was still hanging in our yard. I told him nobody, said we only had one. With 4 horses pulling the cart, we made it home in half the usual time. But as we approached, I saw the whole village gathered on the east hill clutching hoes, sickles, and wooden clubs, looking terrified. My brother jumped off the horse and shouted that it was us. They'd seen horses coming and assumed Turkic raiders were attacking again. Ruhue broke free from my mother and came running down the hill, her little monster costume tail bouncing behind her. Up on the hill, Grandpa Tian and second Grandpa put down their weapons. Uncle Six calmed everyone down, saying that with all of my strange talents, the fishing nets, the bread recipe, trading for a few horses wasn't hard to believe. The old men looked at each other and nodded. Whatever I was doing, it was feeding the village. Nobody was going to ask too many questions. Second Grandpa was stunned by the horses up close. My brother shoved me forward to handle the questions and took Ruhue for a ride instead. The little trader was screaming with excitement on the saddle. I winked at Second Grandpa and suggested we all go to my house to talk. He caught on immediately and helped clear the crowd. The village elders followed me home while I sent Dashin and Debeo to feed the other 3 horses. The moment I sat down, every old man in the yard fixed their eyes on me, ready to ask about the horses. My mother glared at them protectively from behind the tea kettle. I knew I had to seize control of the conversation before the questions started, so I went on the offensive. I asked Uncle Six how many people he had working for him. 16, including himself, building the pickle workshop. Second Grandpa's pottery team had 26. Grandpa Tian's vegetable crew was 5. Add Debeo and Chonyang, and that was roughly 50 people employed out of almost 200 villagers. Half the village was still going hungry. I told them my plan. I wanted to open several workshops and hire every household in the village. Not charity, real jobs where people earned their food through labor. Everyone would work, everyone would eat. Grandpa Tian raised a concern. Most of the remaining villagers were old people, children, and women. Could women really work in workshops? My mother slammed that down instantly. Women worked the fields every day without anyone complaining, she said. That shut everyone up. Second Grandpa backed her, and the others agreed. Then I laid out the terms. For Uncle Six, I offered 6 buns and half a fish daily, a jar of salt every 7 days, and a bushel of rice monthly as the construction team leader, with materials paid separately. He nearly dropped his tea bowl. He said he'd never earned that much in a full year working in the county. For Grandpa Tian, I changed the arrangement. Instead of working under me, he'd sell me vegetables at market price. I'd handle all the washing, cutting, and drying at the pickle workshop. He'd just harvest and deliver. He loved it. He got to stay his own boss. For Second Grandpa, I offered to invest in his pottery operation as a silent partner, with plenty more work coming beyond just pickle jars. That night, the whole village buzzed with excitement over the workshop jobs. The news completely overshadowed the 4 horses, which was exactly what I wanted. And the village elders who'd come to grill me about where the horses came from walked out of my house, having completely forgotten to ask. Balance, 215,725 yuan. The next morning I stood on the stone platform on top of the East Hill with the whole village gathered around me. Time to get organized. I laid out the jobs. The fish drying station by Mulan Creek needed 11 people, 4 to catch fish, 6 to process and dry them, and 1 supervisor. Before I even finished, hands were shooting up everywhere. Auntie Hua asked the question on everyone's mind. What's the pay? I announced the supervisor rate first. 6 buns a day, half a fish, a jar of salt every 7 days, and a bushel of rice per month. The crowd erupted. People turned to my mother to confirm it was real. When she just nodded calmly, the noise doubled. That package was apparently worth about 500 won a month, more than a restaurant waiter earned in the county town. I calmed them down and gave the regular worker rate, 5 buns daily, for people splitting one fish, salt, and rice at half the supervisor amount. The crowd practically stampeded trying to volunteer. Second Grandpa and Grandpa Tian stepped in to restore order, reminding everyone to let me finish talking. I appointed Annie Hua as the fish drying supervisor based on my mother's recommendation of her cooking skills. 1-month trial. If she did well, she'd keep the position. She looked at my mother gratefully and promised not to let me down. Uncle Six was confirmed as construction team leader. He had a full schedule ahead: the pickle workshop, the fish drying station, a dining hall, and then my house. Grandpa Tian would supply vegetables to the pickle workshop. We agreed on market prices, and he'd handle his own hiring. For second Grandpa's pottery operation, I announced something different: no more temporary workers. Everyone there would be permanent staff with guaranteed monthly pay whether there was work or not. The crowd went wild at that. Permanent employment with steady food was unheard of. After the announcements, I jumped off the platform, grabbed a sweaty Ruhui, and walked away with my family and my 3 most trusted people, Dashin, Debeo, and Chonyang. Debeo immediately panicked, saying he couldn't do math and barely knew how to write. I'd assigned the 3 of them to handle record-keeping and accounts for all the workshops. I told them I'd teach them myself. Dashin nodded silently. He was always quiet but dependable. Chonyang pinched Debeo's side to shut him up and gave me a firm nod. Finally, I reminded my mother that she was the pickle workshop supervisor and needed to recruit trustworthy people, since the actual pickling recipes were trade secrets. She blinked, then remembered her own appointment, and ran back up the hill to start hiring before she fell behind. All the workshops kicked off at the same time, and the village came alive. People were heading out to work at dawn with tools over their shoulders. Having a job and a meal waiting changes everything. I did a count the night before. Andy Hua's fish drying station had 10 women. Uncle Six's construction crew had expanded to 30, mostly tough, farm women. Grandpa Tian hired 5 people to help harvest and deliver vegetables. Second Grandpa's pottery workshop had 8 permanent workers and 10 temporary ones, including 5 kids around 10 years old learning the craft as apprentices. My mother's pickle workshop recruited 15 women for washing, drying, and pickling on an assembly line. Chonyang ran the kitchen feeding everyone, with 5 old women helping make buns and fish soup. The crowd was so big that Uncle Six had to pull 10 workers off to build a dining hall on the East Hill first. Dashin and Debeo handled daily bookkeeping for supplies and food consumption. Meanwhile, I was lying in my yard trying to figure out what our first pickle product should be. After a week here, I'd noticed Tang Dynasty people were obsessed with garlic. They ate it with everything: fish, meat, made it into garlic paste and garlic sauce. Poetry from this era literally mentioned dipping steamed pork in garlic sauce. Every household in the village grew garlic, along with scallions, ginger, chives, and Sichuan peppercorns. I couldn't decide on a plan, so I bought a cookbook for 50 yuan. Flipping to the pickle section nearly gave me a heart attack. I'd assumed we could just pickle everything now and sell it in winter. Turns out different pickles have completely different timelines. Quick pickles, the Sichuan style, needed less than 24 hours. Kimchi-type side dishes took 3 to 10 days. Deep-soaked pickles like pickled cucumbers or mustard greens needed 10 to 30 days. And then there was sweet pickled garlic, 40 days or more. Sweet pickled garlic jumped out at me. Garlic soaked in white vinegar and sugar until the sharpness mellows out. It prevents colds, fights infections, and even kills parasites. Perfect for this era with no medicine. And Tang Dynasty people already loved garlic. Plus, 40 days meant the batch would be ready right as the weather turned cold and demand for preserved food spiked. I bought a jar of homemade sweet pickled garlic for 25 yuan to taste test. Popped one in my mouth. Sour, sweet, crunchy. Perfect. What are you sneaking back there, second brother? Ruhui appeared behind me in her Ultraman costume with her friend Yaya, a skinny little girl who was clearly underfed. I gave them each a clove of garlic. Ruhui bit into hers, squinted, then swallowed the whole thing and immediately stared at the jar for more. I broke off a few pieces and told her not to eat too many. Not good for little kids. The 2 girls ran off giggling. I ate another clove and studied the flavor. This was good quality. If we could match it, we'd have buyers lining up. I dumped the remaining garlic into a clay bowl, burned the plastic container in the fire, and headed for the East Hill in my straw sandals to get the pickle workshop started. Up on the East Hill, The village was transforming. The dining hall was going up across from the toilet. People had started caring about hygiene, washing themselves clean, keeping their patched clothes spotless. My mother and her pickle crew were drying sliced radish and cabbage on the hilltop. I brought the sweet pickled garlic up, and everyone who tasted it loved it. The villagers offered to dig up their own garlic for free, but I insisted on buying through Grandpa Tian to keep my word about him being the supplier. People respected that. A promise is a promise. I decided sweet pickled garlic would be our first product. I needed white vinegar and sugar in bulk, which meant another fake trip to town with my brother. I was actually hoping we'd run into more Turkic soldiers to loot. I headed home to tell my brother, but before I could even open my mouth, Dashin and Debeo came sprinting into the yard shouting that Turkic raiders were coming. More than last time, over a dozen riders on horseback. Here's what had happened. About 2 li north of the village, a squad of 16 Turkic cavalry had stopped to rest. Their leader was a young man around 20, unusually clean and well-groomed compared to the others, trimmed hair, shaved beard, an air of authority about him. One of his men, a huge bearded warrior named Aliki, had a horse called Juefing that suddenly went berserk, snapped the tree it was tied to, and bolted south. Aliki grabbed another horse and chased after it. The young leader spotted cooking smoke rising from our direction and assumed it might be a Tang ambush. He rallied his men, and they all rode after Aliki. The reason the horse had bolted was that it had sensed its brother, Hafing, the black horse. One of the 4 horses we'd taken from the dead Turkic soldiers. The 2 horses were from the same mother and had recognized each other. Within minutes, 16 Turkic riders arrived at the edge of our village. But what they found confused them. Instead of terrified peasants fleeing in panic like every other village they'd raided, our people were smiling. They were well-fed, organized, and when they saw the horsemen coming, they grabbed clubs and farming tools and formed up without hesitation. A village that fights back. That was new. I got to the village entrance and saw over a dozen Turkic horsemen facing off against our villagers. I reached into my shirt and gripped the thing I'd just bought. Now that I had money, I could afford serious firepower. My brother and I pushed through the crowd. The villagers parted for us, and Second Grandpa's group closed ranks around me with their tools raised. The Turkic leader was a young man who, surprisingly, spoke broken Chinese. Next to him sat a massive warrior named Aliki with a beard like a bush and a battle axe. The young leader pointed his riding crop at the black horse, my brother's horse, the one we'd taken from the 4 dead soldiers. He demanded to know why their horse was here. I told him I found it. He didn't like my attitude and swung his whip at me. My brother's machete flashed and cut the whip in half before it touched me. Aliki studied my brother carefully. He asked if my brother had killed a warrior named Alu. My brother nodded. The young leader went pale. Apparently Alu had been one of their strongest fighters. They proposed a duel. If my brother won, they'd leave. If he lost, the implication was obvious. I wanted to just pull out my weapon and end it, but my mother walked up to my brother, straightened his collar, patted his shoulder, and sent him forward with pride in her eyes. To them, this duel was the village's only chance of survival. They didn't believe I could take on 16 armed horsemen. My brother squared off against Aliki. The giant swung his axe down like a thunderbolt. My brother rolled clear just in time, then launched himself forward like a leopard. Their weapons clashed, and when they separated, my brother's machete was untouched while the axe had a huge chunk missing from its blade. The modern steel was simply superior. Then the young leader cheated. He fired an arrow that barely missed my brother's nose. I snapped. I rushed out from the crowd and pointed my new purchase at the leader's face. But the Turkic riders couldn't figure out what I was holding. It wasn't a crossbow. There were no arrows. The young leader relaxed, thinking it was harmless. He called off the fight and changed his demand. He told my brother to hand over the machete and he'd spare all our lives. He called himself a king. My brother looked back at our mother and the villagers. One knife for the whole village's safety. He was about to agree. That's when I pulled the trigger. I'd bought a mini Uzi submachine gun for 20,000 yuan and 50 rounds of 9mm ammunition for 1,000. The gun roared, fire spitting from the barrel, smoke everywhere. I screamed every curse I knew and emptied the magazine. Balance, 194,650 yuan. 2 magazines, 50 rounds, all gone in seconds. When the smoke cleared, all 16 Turkic soldiers were on the ground, including that arrogant prince. Not one was moving. I turned around and found every single villager staring at me with their mouths open. My brother and mother were the only ones still standing in place. Everyone else had hit the dirt when the shooting started. I'd made the mistake of jokingly pointing the empty gun at the crowd and clicking the trigger, which sent them scrambling again. I tossed the Uzi to my brother and told him it was useless now, no bullets left. He turned it over in his hands, fascinated. Uncle Six called it the most powerful, hidden weapon he'd ever seen. I told them I'd found it by chance outside the village. Everyone pretended to believe me. I sent Dashin and DeBeo to search the bodies. I couldn't bring myself to look at them. Anything valuable, especially gold or jade, went into a bag for me. The important thing was the horses. I'd been careful during the shooting to aim at the riders, not the animals. All 16 horses had bolted but were now standing under trees nearby, staring at their dead owners. Second Grandpa and Uncle Six volunteered to round them up while I took the children home. The kids were shaking. A dozen of them had watched the whole thing. I picked up Ruhue. She was pale, but trying to be brave. She said I'd been scary, but she wasn't afraid anymore, because those were bad people who took her second brother away. That broke the tension. The village women started agreeing. Those Turkic men had stolen their husbands and sons and grain. They deserved what they got. Grandpa Tian got everyone moving. Some went to help with the horses, others went to dig graves on the back hill. With these 16 plus the 4 from before, I now owned 20 war horses. In a poor county where nobody had a single horse, that was like suddenly owning 20 supercars. I told Uncle Six to build a stable near the village entrance and announced that anyone in the village could use the horses. Just clear it with my brother first. Uncle Six couldn't believe it. I said we'd even build a riding track so people could practice for fun. The kids went wild with excitement. I looked at them and made a bigger promise. I told them they'd all join a village guard. They'd learn to ride horses, shoot bows, and fight. They'd protect the village from anyone who tried to hurt us again. One boy said he wanted to rescue his father. Another said he wanted to fight bad guys like me so nobody would steal their steamed buns. They didn't know their fathers and brothers were already dead, but that didn't matter right now. Someday these kids would grow up to be the backbone of this village, maybe even this country. I grinned and led them all home, promising them soda. I came out of the public toilet humming a love song and ran straight into a group of village women washing vegetables, including my mother. They started teasing me about wanting a wife. I was only 14 in this body, but they didn't care. One woman told my mother she should find a bride for my brother first, so it wouldn't hold up my turn. I saw my mother's eyebrow go up and silently mourned for my brother. Then I got out of there fast. On the slope, I bumped into Grandpa Tian carrying vegetables. He flinched when he saw me, probably still replaying the Uzi scene in his head. I reminded him the pickle workshop's first product was sweet garlic, not cabbage, and to send those greens to the dining hall instead. He said the villagers were giving their garlic for free. I told him no, everyone gets paid market price. Have DeBeo help with the bookkeeping. The change in how people treated me was obvious. They stepped aside when I walked by. Grandpa Tian was sweating nervously just talking to me. I didn't love it, but there wasn't much I could do. Back home, I told Dashin, DeBeo, and Chonyang to survey every household's garlic supply and pay them properly. I offered to let villagers choose payment in rice, flour, or even fabric. Chonyang's eyes lit up at the mention of cloth. DeBeo glanced at her when he thought nobody was looking. I caught it, and so did Dashin. Somebody had a crush. I'd promised Ruhue something sweet today, so I got to work in the kitchen making fruit jam from wild kiwis, apricots, snakeberries, and raisin trees I'd picked around the village. Then I called my brother over to check on my experiment. I'd bought a bag of saltpeter and a case of bottled water. I'd put the water bottles in a big clay vat filled with saltpeter and water. When saltpeter dissolves, it absorbs heat and freezes things. Basic chemistry. The Tang Dynasty's first refrigerator, built just because I wanted to make my little sister a snow cone. My brother lifted the lid and a blast of cold air hit his sweaty face. He stared in amazement. The water bottles had turned to solid ice in the middle of summer. He pulled a few out, and I started crushing ice for fruit-shaved ice. While we were working, Annie Hua showed up with her crew from the fish drying station. They'd finished their daily quota of 300 jin. She said she could easily do 3,000 if I'd let her catch more, but I reminded her we couldn't overfish. Then she brought out what they'd really come for. They'd noticed me picking wild fruit that morning, figured I liked it, and after their shift they'd gone into the hills and picked 3 enormous baskets, taller than half a person, stuffed with the best-looking fruit they could find, all carefully selected. My brother looked at the overflowing baskets in disbelief. Auntie Hua and her friends stood there with rough, calloused hands, not quite knowing what to do with themselves, just laughing and saying if it wasn't enough they'd go deeper into the mountains for more. I couldn't refuse Auntie Hua's fruit. It would have been rude. But 3 giant baskets was way too much for my family alone. Making fruit shaved ice for 100 people would take forever, and honestly only kids would care about that. Then I had a better idea: iced fruit wine. Something everyone could enjoy on a hot day. I asked the women to stay and help. Each one took a type of fruit, removed the pits, and mashed it into pulp. I sent my brother to make more ice using the saltpeter method I'd taught him. Meanwhile, I went inside and came out with 2 big buckets of bulk baijiu, 60-degree Hengshui Leobagan, 10 jin per bucket, 280 yuan total. The smell hit my brother instantly. He stopped what he was doing and stared at the buckets like I'd just murdered someone. He asked how many bottles of good liquor I'd wasted. I told him to relax. This was cheap bulk stuff, nowhere near as good as the erguo 2 I'd given him. He glanced toward the bedroom where he'd hidden his stash under the bed and calmed down a little. After about an hour, we hauled everything up to the dining hall on the East Hill. I mixed ice, wine, sugar, and mashed fruit in big clay vats, then topped them off with spring water from the kitchen's water tank. The workers helped carry the heavy vats back and forth. When I stirred the final mix, the raw alcohol smell disappeared and was replaced by this incredible aroma of sweet, wild apricot. Everyone standing nearby started swallowing involuntarily. I poured myself half a bowl and took a sip. Closed my eyes. Perfect, sweet, tart, cold, with just enough kick from the alcohol. The crowd stared at me in agony, waiting for the verdict. Uncle Six begged me to just say something. I drained the bowl and told Chonyang to distribute it with dinner. 2 bowls for supervisors, 1 for everyone else. Leftovers go to villagers at home. Second, Grandpa and the other old men grabbed their eating bowls and ran to line up before I'd even finished talking. My mother came over and asked how much this had all cost. I shook my head. A few hundred yuan was nothing. I had almost 200,000 in my balance and a bag of war loot at home I hadn't even sorted through yet. But the real reason I did it wasn't the money. Since the Uzi incident, the villagers had started treating me differently. Too much fear, too much deference. I needed to stay approachable. Keep feeding people, keep sharing, keep being the guy who makes cold fruit wine on a hot day. Learn from Liu Bei, win hearts, build a good reputation. That was worth more than any amount of gold. I found my brother and Dashin in a lotus pond west of the village, covered in mud, pulling up armfuls of lotus root. I'd stumbled on the pond while picking fruit. From the hillside it just looked like a patch of green grass, but it was actually full of blooming lotus flowers, lotus seeds. And best of all, lotus root perfect for pickling. While watching them demolish a box of fried fish I'd brought, I realized I'd been eating nothing but fish since arriving in this world. No pork, no lamb, no beef. I asked my brother to teach me archery so we could go hunting in the mountains. He agreed. He'd been wanting to test the bow we'd taken from the Turkic prince. We brought the lotus root back to my mother's pickle workshop. She'd gotten good at this. Pickled lotus root slices were just like doing radish. That night, I finally opened the loot bag from the 16 Turkic soldiers. The system found 7 liang of gold worth 70,000 yuan and 3 pieces of worked jade worth 34,800. I recycled everything. Balance, 299,220 yuan. Nearly 300,000. Enough to feed the whole village for close to a year, easily lasting until the historical peace treaty at the Wei River. Next morning, we geared up for the hunt. Ruhui threw a fit, crying that she wanted to come fight tigers. I bribed her with soda, and she forgot about me within minutes, happily making her own shaved ice. Our hunting party was 5 people: my brother, me, Dashin, Debeo, and Chonyang. She came because nobody in the village except my brother could beat her in a fight. On the trail, I tried to use a bow. Couldn't even pull it back. My arrows flopped out and landed 5 meters away. Meanwhile, Debeo, who I'd assumed was as weak as me, drew a full bow and hit tree trunks with decent accuracy. Turned out my brother had been taking him along to practice for years. Chonyang smacked Debeo's head and told me not to compare myself to him. I handed my bow to Dashin and declared I had my own hunting methods. Everyone laughed, including my brother, who shot me a look of pure contempt. That set me off. I proposed a bet. My brother, Debeo, and Chonyang as one team, me and Dashin as the other. First team to bag over 200 gene of game lights a signal fire, and the losing team has to run back to the village naked. I quickly reassigned Chonyang as referee when I remembered what that would actually look like. She accepted the judge role with a grin and a bit of drool at the corner of her mouth. I couldn't use the gun. I'd just gotten everyone to stop thinking about it. Traps couldn't look too modern either, since Dashin was with me. Then it hit me. Rope snares using bamboo springs. Simple enough that anyone could have thought of it. I asked my brother for the climbing rope from the backpack. He felt the bag suddenly get heavier. I just bought it and handed it over with a twitchy eye. Everyone on his team relaxed when they saw it was just rope. Debeo covered his mouth to keep from laughing. They all thought I was going to lose for sure. We split up. Half an hour later, I had Dashin hold down a bent bamboo pole while I rigged the first snare. The setup was straightforward. Carve a notch in a tree trunk, wedge in a trigger stick attached to the rope, run the rope over a branch, and tie it to the bamboo tip. On the ground, lay out a wide loop. When an animal steps into the loop and pulls, the trigger stick pops free, the bamboo snaps upright, and the animal gets yanked into the air. I set up 2 snares about 50 meters apart. While Dashin wasn't looking, I bought some sweet potatoes, sliced them up, and scattered them near each trap as bait. The starchy smell would carry through the forest. Then I led Dashin to a nearby hilltop where we could watch one of the traps, and we lay down to wait. Dashin thought I was crazy. He said we should at least try hunting with bows instead of sitting around. I told him the animals' noses were better than our eyes. Let them come to us. He mentioned wild boars had raided the village fields before, which was exactly what I'd been counting on. Boars are bold, hungry, and they love starchy roots. I stacked dry kindling and damp grass next to me, ready to light a signal fire the moment something happened. We waited through the hot afternoon, chatting on and off. Dashin kept nervously scanning the horizon for smoke from my brother's team. Then we heard it. A furious, booming squeal echoing through the trees, followed by thrashing sounds. Something was dangling in the air through the branches. It actually worked. Dashin stared in disbelief. I pumped my fist, grabbed my lighter, and lit the signal fire. Dashin suddenly panicked. What if the boar was under 200 gene? I told him to listen more carefully. There were 2 sets of screaming, not one. Both traps had caught something. And the voices were deep and heavy, not the high-pitched squeals of piglets. These were big adults, definitely over 200 gene combined. The 2 wild boars hanging from my bamboo traps were enormous, the biggest I'd ever seen, way beyond anything in a zoo. 1 male, 1 female. Dashin noticed the female's belly was unusually swollen. I took a closer look. She was pregnant. We hadn't just caught 2 boars, we'd caught a whole future litter. We did our signal call, a ridiculous Tarzan yell we'd agreed on beforehand, since smoke could have been anyone, even Turkic soldiers. My brother's team came running. He had wild chickens and rabbits tied to his belt. Debeo was carrying a small leopard on his back. Chonyang was casually holding 2 live snakes that were wrapped around both her arms. None of it added up to 200 gene. I'd won. Debeo poked at the female boar and said we should butcher her since sow meat tastes better than boar. I stopped him. This one was staying alive. My brother spotted the pregnancy immediately and agreed. Chonyang nodded too, saying her family used to raise pigs and this sow was definitely carrying. I told them my plan. Keep both boars, breed them, and give the village a steady supply of pork. Then Chonyang just walked over and chopped the rope with her machete. The sow crashed to the ground and charged straight at me with red eyes. Before I could move, my brother ducked under her, grabbed her front legs with one hand and back legs with the other, and lifted her clean off the ground. Chonyang tied all 4 legs together, threaded a bamboo pole through, and they hoisted her up between them like it was routine. This pig weighed at least 500 gene. They did the same with the boar. My brother and Dashin took the sow, Debeo and Chonyang carried the male. I just stood there with my mouth open. Then I remembered the bet. Strip. Both of you lost. Take your clothes off. The news of 2 live wild boars spread through the village in seconds. Everyone who could walk crowded onto the East Hill. The old men debated where to put the pig pen. I suggested halfway up the East Hill slope. dig a flat platform into the hillside, use the mountain wall as one side to save wood, and the pig waste could be flushed downhill to the cesspit, just like the toilet. The boars liked rooting in dirt anyway. Uncle Six took his crew to start building immediately. Village women grabbed tools and pitched in without being asked. I handed the hunting spoils over to Chonyang for butchering. 3 wild chickens, for rabbits, 1 leopard, and 2 snakes. The village kids were drooling. They'd been eating fish every day, but considered mountain game the only real meat. Ruhui clung to my leg begging for chicken legs and meat soup. I planned out the menu: snake and chicken stew, boiled chicken with dipping sauce, spicy stir-fried rabbit with radish and greens. As for the leopard, I'd never cooked one, so I handed it to Annie Hua. She lit up like it was her birthday and promised to show everyone her real skills. According to my history book, August 24th was when the Turkic army attacked Jialing and the great General Yuchi Jingda was sent north with 800 elite soldiers. He crushed them, captured a Turkic commander, and killed over 1,000 cavalry. I hid the book under my bed and stepped outside. Ruhui was in her Ultraman costume singing folk songs while my mother shaved ice. The moment she saw me, she ran over and announced she didn't like the Ultraman outfit anymore because it had no tail. She wanted more little monster costumes, the ones with the green tail. I promised to buy her some. She climbed into my arms and smothered my face with icy, jam-flavored kisses. That's when I noticed her lips were freezing cold. I asked how much shaved ice she'd eaten. My mother said just 1 bowl, as I'd instructed. Then she held up the bowl Ruhui had been using. It was the size of a wash basin. The little con artist had told my mother I'd specifically approved that bowl. 1 bowl, technically. I was furious. I grabbed her regular tiny eating bowl and declared this was her new ice cream bowl from now on. 1 small bowl per day, no exceptions, or I'd stop buying her candy, clothes, and soda. Her eyes went red instantly. I handed her to my mother and walked out the door before I could cave. Her wailing followed me all the way to the East Hill. The village women looked concerned. I told them she was throwing a tantrum because I'd cut off her unlimited ice supply. Uncle Six laughed and said his son Debeo had been the same way with malt candy as a kid. It hurt me to be strict with her, but her stomach couldn't handle that much cold food. The pig pen was nearly done. Uncle Six had gone all out. Every post was a whole tree trunk buried 2 meters deep with only half showing above ground. Those boars could ram all they wanted and nothing would budge. Just 2 more posts and a row of planks, and it would be finished. Then the ground started shaking. A deep rumble rolled toward us from the south, getting louder. Uncle Six thought it was an earthquake, but I ran to the hilltop and saw what it really was. A column of cavalry in full black armor, horses armored too, thundering toward the village. Nearly 1,000 riders. My heart stopped until second grandpa recognized them. Tang soldiers. Our soldiers. They slowed briefly at the tree line near our village. Then the lead rider shouted a command, and the whole formation swept north past us at full gallop. The ground trembled under their hooves. Uncle Six came running up, grinning. He said those were the Xuanjiao army, the black armored cavalry, the most fearsome unit in the entire Tang military. The same force that the then Prince Li Shimin once led with just 3,500 men to destroy an enemy army of over 100,000. I knew exactly who they were. In 5,000 years of Chinese military history, they ranked among the top 4 cavalry forces ever assembled. And they were heading north to deal with the Turkic invasion. Everyone on the hilltop was buzzing with excitement, fantasizing about how the Turks would be crushed. I just smiled quietly. I already knew how it would end. Up in a tree north of the village, my brother watched the black armored cavalry ride past. I didn't see him, but I could imagine the fire in his eyes. He was born to be one of them. But after a long moment, he loosened his grip on the machete, looked back toward our village, and climbed down. He chose to come home, a young man with iron in his blood and war in his heart, torn between glory on the frontier and the family waiting for him behind a stick fence. While the black armored cavalry rode north, their commander ordered his deputy, a man called Deputy Xue, to take 3 soldiers and investigate our village. They'd noticed 20 fine war horses in a tiny farming village, which was suspicious enough to warrant checking for Turkic spies. I didn't know any of this was happening. I'd gone home and found Ruhui asleep on the stone slab, her face still streaked with tears and her eyes swollen from crying. My heart ached. My mother told me not to worry, The girl forgot grudges the moment food appeared. I decided to go down to the rice paddies by Mulan Creek and collect river snails to make her a spicy 5-spice snail dish as a peace offering. I left in my flip-flops, already picturing her drooling face. After I left, my brother came back from wherever he'd been watching the cavalry pass. He had no energy to practice and just sat on the stone slab drinking ergo too, one slow sip at a time. My mother understood without asking. He'd seen the legendary Xuanjia army ride by, and his heart was burning to join them. But she said nothing. Too many men left for war and never came back. Meanwhile, Deputy Shui and his 3 soldiers crept through the forest to our village's edge. They observed everything. Uncle Six's carpentry yard, the busy East Hill, the construction, and most importantly, the horse stable with 20 top-quality warhorses being fed by village children. He sent his 3 men to quietly grab villagers for questioning. Then he spotted my brother in our yard, swinging his machete in that impossibly fast blur. Even from a distance, the deputy could barely track the movements. He jumped down from his tree and approached. When my brother saw a fully armored Xuanjia soldier standing outside our fence holding a 7-foot infantry saber, the 2 locked eyes. The soldier raised his blade in challenge. My brother's eyes lit up. This was his chance to measure himself against the Empire's best. He grabbed his machete and his bottle of liquor, vaulted the fence, and the 2 of them ran to the hills behind the village without a word. My mother watched them go, holding a freshly awakened Ruhui, and sighed. They fought. The deputy was skilled with proper military technique and disciplined footwork. My brother was raw speed and savage power with no formal training. They traded over a dozen blows before the deputy jumped back and called a halt. In thick local dialect, he cursed that my brother's blade had chewed his saber to pieces. My brother checked his machete. A few scratches, but the edge was perfect. The deputy's military-grade saber looked like a saw blade, covered in notches and chips. The modern steel was simply in another class. The deputy tossed his ruined saber to my brother, snatched the machete out of his hands, and started fawning over it like a kid with a new toy. My brother looked at the wrecked saber he'd been handed and had the good sense to feel a little guilty. When I got home, my mother was sitting on the stone slab staring at the mountains with misty eyes. She wouldn't tell me what was wrong. Ruhui was still giving me the cold shoulder, lying on the slab, drawing circles with her finger. I dumped a jar of river snails into a basin to clean them with salt. The little monster pretended not to care, but I could see her sneaking glances. So I started talking to myself about how nobody in the family liked snails, and I'd just have to take them all to second grandpa's house to eat there. That did it. She tackled my leg before I reached the gate, wailing that I didn't love her anymore. I picked her up and promised everything was for her. 5 spice snails and spicy snails, enough to stuff her belly round. She stopped crying instantly, patted my forehead like I was a pet, and told me to hurry up and cook. Then she demanded an iced cola on top, threatening more tears if I refused. As it got dark, my brother walked in carrying a long blade that looked like a saw, a Xuanjia army infantry saber, all chewed up and full of notches. His machete was gone. He'd been challenged to a sparring match by a Xuanjia deputy officer. He'd beaten the man's weapon to pieces with the machete, and the soldier, needing a functional blade for the upcoming battle, had borrowed my brother's machete and left his ruined saber behind. Promised he'd come back and swap them. My brother clearly didn't believe the guy would return either. He looked miserable. I told him not to worry. I'd get him something better. His eyes lit up. I asked if he'd ever heard of the mightiest blade in existence, Frostmourne. He was mesmerized. I pointed at the basin full of snails and told him to clip all their tails off first, then I'd tell him more. He nodded like a zombie and started working at incredible speed, lost in fantasies of legendary weapons. While he worked, I pulled up the shop. Frostmourne replicas, a 1-to-1 scale reproduction from the game. Plastic for 98 yuan, aluminum for 588, stainless steel for 3,288, and titanium alloy for 46,500. There were even fancier metals I couldn't afford. I almost bought the stainless steel version, but then I remembered my brother's inhuman strength. He'd snap stainless steel like a toy. I gritted my teeth and bought the titanium alloy version, hiding it under his bed for later. Balance, 252,520 yuan. That sword cost as much as a sniper rifle. But my brother was worth it. I'd barely finished buying the sword when second grandpa burst through the gate with a group of panicked villagers. 3 of them, Andy Hua's husband Lu San and 2 village women, had been grabbed and interrogated by Xuanjia soldiers. Lu San was shaking. He was the most educated man in the village, a scholar who spent his days reading instead of working, supported entirely by his wife's salary from the fish drying station. He told me the soldiers had asked about the Turkic horses and the dead raiders. He'd told them everything, but credited my brother with the kills, not me. The 2 women confirmed they'd said the same thing. My brother stepped forward and said it matched what he'd told the deputy he'd sparred with. The story held together. The village's best fighter had defended everyone and killed the Turkic soldiers in combat. Nobody mentioned the Uzi. I asked why the Xuanjia soldiers had come back at all. My brother explained, 20 Turkic warhorses in a tiny village looked suspicious. They'd thought we might be harboring enemy spies. It was actually well-intentioned. I told everyone to relax and to always remember the official story. My brother Shi Junmai led the fight against the Turkic raiders. That was the truth as far as anyone outside this village needed to know. Then I rewarded the 3 who'd been captured. They'd kept their heads under pressure and come to report immediately. Lu San would get 2 sets of scholar's robes, and the 2 women would each get 2 sets of the ice silk clothes like my mother wore. All 3 nearly collapsed with gratitude. Second grandpa and the other elders looked jealous. Being kidnapped had never paid so well. I also hired Lu San as the village teacher, with pay higher than a supervisor's, around 700 or 800 won per month. He was useless at physical labor, but the village children needed education, and he was the only literate person besides my brother and me. Lu San ran straight to the dining hall to tell Annie Hua. He'd traded one of his scholar's robes for a set of ice silk clothes in her size. When she realized he'd given up his own reward to get her something nice, her eyes went red, and she clutched the cool fabric to her chest. The couple stood there, him grinning like an idiot, her trying to hide her tears, while second grandpa kicked Lu San in the backside and grumbled about how some people had all the luck. The village was running like clockwork now. Every household had someone working, and even the kids under 10 had jobs, gathering fruit, catching snails and loaches, paid in candy and shaved ice. I called it earned rewards. I checked on the pickle workshop construction with Uncle Six. It would be done today. He asked if I wanted to start building my house next. I told him no, build the school first. We had over a dozen kids in the village, and only Lu San's children could read. That was unacceptable. I asked him to come by my house after dinner so I could show him something called a blackboard. I'd buy chalk and a special paint for it. Much better than the sand trays poor schools used for writing practice. Walking to the pig pen with Ruhue, I learned that yesterday's excitement had involved my little sister and her gang of kids tormenting the male boar, throwing rocks, splashing water, until it charged the fence so hard it nearly broke through. I scolded her, but she started crying and said they were only trying to punish the male for stealing the female's food. The pig pen was actually pretty clean since waste got flushed daily down to the cesspit. When the boars saw me, the male charged the fence furiously. He clearly remembered who'd caught him. The female just grunted and lay down in her straw. She looked ready to give birth any day. I told the village women to have Auntie Hua send 10 live fish per day to the pregnant sow. 5 in the morning, 5 at night, continuing until the piglets were weaned. Wild boars eat anything including fish, and the animal protein would help her produce milk. The women's faces went sour. Workers got half a fish per meal. This pig was getting 10 whole fish daily. Word spread fast. The pig eats better than the people. Most villagers grumbled. A few understood. It was my operation and my money. But the complaints needed handling. Uncle Six spoke up first. He told everyone that wealthy families fed their warhorses special grain mixes and even ginseng. Proper care of livestock wasn't wasteful. It was investment. Then Lu San jumped in. He reminded everyone how dangerous childbirth was without proper nutrition. He pointed out that Uncle Six's wife had died in childbirth because she couldn't get enough food during the war. Every woman in the crowd had been through pregnancy and knew the toll it took on a body without nourishment. If the sow didn't eat well, the piglets would be weak or dead, and the village's dream of a steady pork supply would die with them. The crowd went quiet. The women especially understood. They'd lived it. My mother watched the whole thing from a distance, smiled, picked up her vegetable basket, and walked home. The little crisis had resolved itself, and she'd spotted a few useful allies in the process. I woke up to my mother chasing my brother around the yard with a stick. He'd cut up the family's prized leopard skin, worth at least 5 strings of cash, to wrap around his new sword as a makeshift sheath. My mother was furious. I waved it off. 5 strings was nothing to me now, which only made her angrier. 2 wasteful sons instead of 1. My brother sat on the stone slab fitting the leopard hide around Frostmourne, then strapped it to his back and struck a pose like some fantasy warrior. Hawaiian shirt, beach shorts, straw sandals, and a giant skull-pummeled sword wrapped in spotted fur. He looked ridiculous and was clearly thrilled about it. Up on the East Hill, the school had been built overnight, just a roof with no walls, open for airflow and light. Lucien was painting the blackboard I'd given him. When he saw me, he bowed deeply with tears in his eyes. He'd been practicing calligraphy with sticks in the dirt his entire life. Having a real blackboard and chalk meant the world to him. I promised to buy him a proper brush, ink, and paper set next time. He nearly fell over with joy. In this era, writing supplies were luxury goods monopolized by noble families. A poor scholar could never afford them. At the dining hall, I found a crowd of unfamiliar women surrounding Chonyang. They were from neighboring villages. Some had married out of Shago years ago. They'd come begging to trade for steamed buns. Their children were skin and bones, some sick from hunger. Chonyang was torn. These women had known her since childhood, but the buns belonged to me, and she couldn't give them away without permission. I told her to trade with anyone originally from our village at market price. For outsiders, I had to say no. Our flour supply was limited, and I was already operating at a loss. Chonyang showed me what they'd brought to trade. Baskets full of eggs, wild chicken, duck, quail, snake, even crane eggs, all cleaned and carefully collected from the mountains. I'd almost asked why they didn't just eat the eggs instead. Then I caught myself. People can't survive on eggs alone. Without grain, they'd have no energy and would get sick. I'd nearly said something as ignorant as that ancient emperor who asked why starving peasants didn't just eat meat porridge. I changed my mind. Anyone who came to trade eggs could exchange at market price, but I'd give them raw flour and rice instead of finished buns so it wouldn't overload the kitchen. They could steam their own bread at home. I sent off the happy village women with their flour and rice, and my mother crept out from the pickle workshop where she'd been hiding from them the whole time. She admitted she'd ducked out on purpose to avoid their begging. I was starting to see where my brother got his stingy streak. She reported that the first batch of pickles, spicy cabbage and radish, was coming along nicely, just 2 more days until they'd be ready to eat. Since the Turkic army was still out there and we couldn't safely trade in town, I told her to distribute the first batch free to every household. She hated the idea. I explained it was an investment. When we eventually needed people to haul pickles to the county market, goodwill would matter. She grumbled that we already paid wages, but I'd made up my mind. While we argued over pickled vegetables, 50 li away, history was unfolding exactly as my book said it would. General Yuchi Jingda had arrived at a river valley east of Jingyang with 5,000 troops, facing 20,000 Turkic cavalry blocking the road to Jailing. His deputy was a black-faced, bearded officer named Shui Wanjun, the same man who'd taken my brother's machete. Yuchi Jingda studied the enemy position, then casually snatched the machete right out of Shui Wanjun's hand. Before the deputy could protest, the general leaped onto a black horse and charged alone into 20,000 enemy soldiers. The machete was a revelation in his hands. Normal sabers dulled after 6 or 7 kills and became useless clubs. But the modern high-carbon steel held its edge through 20, then 30 kills. Yuchi Jingda aimed every strike at faces, something no warrior would normally dare, since skulls destroy blades. But this blade cut through bone like butter. Each victim lost the top half of their head in one clean stroke. The carnage was so horrifying it broke the Turkic morale completely. He fought his way straight to the enemy commander, Ashide Wamachuo, who was gripping a massive battle axe. One swing from the general, and the axe head went spinning through the air, leaving the commander holding a bare wooden handle. "Surrender or die," Yuchi Jingda said, flicking blood off the machete. The commander surrendered. Over 1,000 Turkic soldiers died that day. Shui Wanjun watched from the hilltop, heartbroken, looking toward our village. "Sorry, kid," he muttered. "That knife's never coming back now." I knew none of this at the time. I was at home arguing with my mother about free pickles. It was nearly September, but still scorching hot. I'd taken to keeping a vat of saltpeter water in my room as a makeshift air conditioner. I just laid down for a nap when DeBeo came shouting at my door. "It's born. 12 piglets." I told him to watch his phrasing. He'd made it sound like I was the one giving birth. I threw on my sandals and headed to the pig pen. The entire village, all 178 people minus 3 who couldn't walk, was already crowded around. The elders were holding piglets and laughing. Auntie Hua was feeding the sow live fish. Ruhui and her kid army were tormenting the tied-up boar as usual. Grandpa Tian said something remarkable. All 12 piglets were healthy and strong, not a single rut. The village women credited my policy of feeding the sow 10 fish a day. She was noticeably bigger than when we'd caught her. 3 males, 9 females, which was perfect. I'd only need 1 or 2 breeding males. The rest would eventually become pork. Uncle Six licked his lips and suggested that by tradition, a litter this big called for a feast. I could see the old men's eyes light up while my mother rolled hers. I agreed and went bigger than anyone expected. Tomorrow at noon, a banquet on the East Hill. The whole village invited, not just one person per household. Nearly 200 people. Uncle Six turned red, regretting that he'd opened his mouth and cost me so much. I waved it off. I sent my brother, Dashin, and DeBeo hunting for rabbits, chickens, snakes, whatever they could find. My brother swung his leopard-wrapped Frostmorn dramatically before walking off into the forest. He was getting more ridiculous by the day. I assigned my mother to prepare 4 types of pickles as cold appetizer plates: spicy radish, spicy cabbage, sour lotus root, and sweet garlic. I sent the village kids to gather 3 types of wild fruit, 2 baskets each, promising new clothes as payment. Their parents tried to come thank me, but found their sons standing in a daze and smacked them back to their senses instead. Then I started buying supplies. For buckets of baijiu for 560 yuan, assorted sauces and spices for 300. Pocket change now with over 250,000 in the bank. When Shonyang and Annie Hua arrived, I taught them to make flour rolls, stuffed buns, and explained the concept of noodles. They said buns were manageable, but noodles for 200 people would be impossible by hand. I told them I'd handle the noodles with Uncle Six's help. They stared at me. What could a carpenter do with noodles? I smiled. A craftsman's hands can do anything. I was going to have him build a simple noodle press. A few gene of dough in, perfect noodles out. Half a day's work at most. Balance, 251,980 yuan. I gave Uncle Six my sketch for a wooden noodle press. He studied it and said it was simpler than the furniture I'd had him build. I told him I'd provide the metal plate with the holes for shaping the noodles. I bought a set of attachments from the shop for 2 yuan each, different sizes and shapes. He figured he could have the whole machine done in under 4 hours. While everyone was busy preparing for tomorrow's piglet celebration feast, a group of strangers in fine blue silk robes appeared at the village entrance. Second Grandpa recognized the leader and hurried down with Grandpa Tian and Lu San to greet him. The man was called Steward Wei, apparently someone important who managed affairs for a wealthy family. With him was a well-dressed teenager with big, curious eyes. Steward Wei immediately noticed the horse stable and demanded to know where a tiny village got 20 war horses. Second Grandpa told him they'd been taken from Turkic raiders. The steward was alarmed until the teenager laughed and pointed out that the main Turkic army was currently facing off against the emperor at the Wei River and had no time for small villages. The steward asked how it happened. Second Grandpa stuck to our agreed story. My brother Shi Junmai had led the villagers to fight back and kill the raiders. Lu San cleverly muddied the details by mentioning our 28 dead men. Technically true, they'd been killed during the earlier slave raids, but it made it sound like we'd lost them in the same battle. The steward assumed we'd suffered heavy casualties fighting 20 Turkic elite soldiers, which made the victory sound heroic rather than suspicious. Nobody was going to explain that one 14-year-old with a submachine gun had done all the killing. The teenager bowed respectfully to the villagers. Steward Wei asked to visit the graves of the fallen later, and Second Grandpa gratefully accepted. Then the steward got to business. He wanted to buy 2 of our horses. His master's 5th daughter was about to marry into the household of Prince Wu, a royal marriage, and they needed fine horses as wedding gifts. Lu San quickly said all horses were available except for 2. Lightning, my brother's black horse, and Baifoam, the white one. Those already had owners. The steward pressed harder. He asked if the owners were in the village. Second grandpa nervously confirmed that lightning belonged to my brother and Biphone was mine. I had no idea any of this was happening. I was in my room buying noodle press parts. I asked my mother who the visitors were. She said the only one she knew was Steward Wei, who managed affairs for some wealthy family. After my father disappeared, Steward Wei had looked after our family. He was the reason my mother could pay off our labor tax by sewing shoe soles instead of sending my brother and me to do forced work. I owed this man without even knowing it. Ruhui came running and complaining that the teenager from the group had been chasing her trying to touch her monster costume. The kid followed her into the kitchen and froze when he saw my mother's ice silk outfit. He stared openly, fascinated by the fabric. I coughed loudly to snap him out of it. He blushed and asked where we'd bought the material. My mother smoothly said it came from a foreign merchant, comfortable but nothing fancy. The teenager noticed my Hawaiian shirt too, puzzled that the flower pattern wasn't embroidered but somehow printed into the cloth. He muttered, "Foreign merchant," to himself and left. My mother looked worried. I told her not to stress. We were in the middle of nowhere, and he was just curious. Once things calmed down, I'd have Dashin and DeBeo pose as foreign traders and sell some fabric in town to create a believable source. I brought out chilled fruit wine and steamed buns for the guests. Steward Wei looked at me sadly, having heard about my memory loss. He offered to take me to a doctor in Chang'an. My brother declined, saying familiar surroundings would help me recover better. Then Steward Wei mentioned our father. He said he couldn't reveal much, only that our dad was still tied up with something and couldn't come home yet. My brother's face brightened. Apparently our father had vanished 2 years ago, and this steward's monthly visits with news had been the only lifeline. The Turkic invasion had cut off contact for 2 months. The real excitement came when Steward Wei touched the wine jug and felt how cold it was. The teenager jumped up. "Ice in summer?" My brother casually mentioned I'd figured out how to make it. I could see the steward's mind racing. His family's 5th daughter was about to marry into a royal household. A secret method for making ice in summer could be an incredible wedding gift to the imperial family, the kind of thing that would strengthen his master's political position. My brother glanced at me. I gave him a tiny nod. He offered to share the formula with Steward Wei for free. Both the steward and the teenager looked stunned. The kid stared at my brother like a cat eyeing a fish, already calculating how to make the most of this gift. I walked away quietly. The saltpeter trick was basic chemistry, practically worthless to me. But to a noble family trying to curry favor with the Tang royal court, it was priceless. Sometimes the cheapest thing you own is the most valuable gift you can give. I stayed in the kitchen doorway playing with Ruhui while my brother entertained the guests. He was doing well, pouring drinks, making conversation, playing the role of head of household since our father was gone. Steward Wei and the teenager loved the chilled fruit wine, draining their cups fast and pushing them forward for refills. My brother warned them to eat something first since the wine was strong. He pushed the steamed buns toward them. Steward Wei picked one up, puzzled. He'd never seen anything like it. The teenager bit right in and declared it better than anything at their mansion. The steward was more careful, tore off a piece, sniffed it, then ate. He couldn't stop praising how soft and springy it was, nothing like the flat, dense steamed cakes they were used to. They both kept eating without pausing to talk. Then my mother brought out a platter of pickles, spicy radish, spicy cabbage, sour lotus root slices, and sweet garlic, all arranged neatly. Steward Wei barely glanced at it. In his experience, pickles were just overly salty emergency food for winter when no fresh vegetables were available. The teenager ignored them completely. But the moment the platter hit the table, my brother started drooling. Ruhui abandoned me mid-game, her little monster tail swinging behind her as she charged toward the food yelling for sour lotus root. My brother gave her a slice. She bit down with a loud crunch that made both guests turn and stare. They'd never seen pickled lotus root before. The teenager looked at the platter with new eyes. The radish cubes were glistening and translucent, dusted with red chili powder, the cabbage cut into neat, bite-sized pieces. These weren't the sad, salt-soaked vegetables they knew. Then the teenager picked up a piece of sweet garlic, hesitating. He liked garlic, but hated the smell it left in your mouth. My brother noticed and offered him a lotus root slice instead, personally placing it in his bowl. The teenager froze. Nobody outside his household had ever served him food so casually and warmly. He stared at the lotus root in his bowl, then at the garlic already there, trying to decide. From the kitchen doorway, I watched the scene unfold. My brother was a natural host, generous, attentive, completely unaware that his simple kindness was making a deeper impression on these wealthy visitors than any fancy banquet could. While the teenager was still deciding whether to eat the garlic, Chonyang arrived with a food box. Inside were the new flour rolls and stuffed buns I'd just taught the kitchen crew to make, plus garlic shrimp, chopped pepper fish head, and fish soup. Second Grandpa had sent them over for the guests to try. My mother noticed Steward Wei looking puzzled at how well we were eating. She smoothly explained that my brother had seized gold and grain from the dead Turkic raiders, which was why the village could afford proper food now. The steward relaxed. That made sense. The teenager stuffed himself silly. It was clearly the best meal he'd ever had. Everything was new to him. The soft buns, the tangy pickles, the chilled fruit wine. He barely came up for air. After dinner, my brother took them on a tour of the village. The public toilet was a huge hit. Steward Wei came out marveling at the flush system, the cleanliness, and the bamboo faucet for hand washing. He immediately decided he wanted one built at his master's mansion and asked my brother to send Uncle Six over to do the job. The teenager had been too embarrassed to use the toilet in front of everyone, but Steward Wei whispered something to him, and he dashed inside. He came back raving about the privacy of the stalls, but complained that squatting was uncomfortable. My brother casually mentioned that second Grandpa's pottery workshop was developing something called a toilet seat that you could sit on, especially good for people with bad knees. The teenager's eyes went wide, and he nodded eagerly. They walked around the East Hill as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant reds. Villagers sat around the bonfire eating dinner and chatting. The teenager tugged on Steward Wei's sleeve and asked if they could stay the night. He'd heard from Ruhu Wei that there was a big feast tomorrow, 12 people celebrating their birthday at the same time. That was the piglet banquet, of course, but Ruhu Wei had apparently given the kid her own creative interpretation. Steward Wei agreed. It was too late and too dangerous to travel the mountain roads at night. He promised the teenager a tent with thick grass bedding. The teenager beamed, then stole another glance at my brother, who was laughing with some villagers nearby. The kid's pale cheeks flushed pink, from the bonfire, or the sunset, or something else entirely. I was sitting at the dining hall eating with the villagers when I caught the teenager staring at my brother. I followed the gaze, looked back at the kid's blushing face, and started humming a cheesy love song under my breath. Oh boy. I rolled out of bed around 8 or 9 and heard that my brother had already taken the teenager hunting in the mountains. Steward Wei was complaining to my mother about it. I silently gave my brother 32 thumbs up. He still had no idea the young gentleman was almost certainly a girl. Uncle Six sidled up while I was eating a boiled egg and asked if he should accept the job building toilets for the Wei mansion. I told him absolutely. This was his chance to build a reputation. Chang'an had tens of thousands of households and over 100 city wards. Even if each ward only needed 5 public toilets, he'd have more work than he could handle. He deflated a little and admitted the real problem. The bamboo faucets needed rubber gaskets to stop dripping, and only I had those. I told him I'd give him my remaining stock and try to find more from the foreign merchants. In truth, each gasket cost me half a yuan, but I wasn't going to promise unlimited supply just yet. The rubber ring was a technical bottleneck that kept the toilet design tied to me. Not a bad position to be in. Uncle Six promised me a fair cut of any profits and ran off to close the deal with Steward Wei. I didn't care about the money. Let him have it. I went to the kitchen to check on the feast preparations. 10 stoves were going in the back courtyard, steaming 600 pieces of bread, rolls, and stuffed buns for 200 people. Chonyang and her crew were running the noodle press I'd designed. Auntie Hua was fascinated by the different shaped pasta attachments, turning them over in her hands. I told her to experiment. Thick and thin noodles cook differently and taste different too. The noodles came out perfectly chewy. I bit into a raw strand and nodded with satisfaction. I walked through the prep stations with Chonyang. We had 12 dishes ready, not counting whatever my brother brought back from hunting. For appetizers, spicy radish, spicy cabbage, vinegar celery, sweet garlic, and sour lotus root. Main starches, steamed buns, flour rolls, vegetable stuffed buns, and seafood noodle soup with fish slices, shrimp, snail meat, boiled eggs, cilantro, and scallions. The big dishes were all fish-based: steamed silver carp, chopped pepper fish head, pan-fried dried fish, deep-fried fish chunks, salt and pepper river fish, fried shrimp balls, braised lochin sauce, and spicy river snails. 2 soups rounded it out: a sour and spicy fish fillet soup made with pickled radish and lotus root, and a wild mushroom broth with mountain herbs. What was supposed to be a simple piglet celebration had turned into a 12-course banquet for 18 tables. My brother's hunting haul would just be bonus dishes on top. I'd planned it that way from the start. The mountain game was extra, not essential. I banged the old bronze bell hanging outside the dining hall, a piece of a Warring States-era chime set that second grandpa had dug up. I wanted to recycle it, but bronze wasn't on the buyback list. The sound carried across the whole village, and kids came running from the horse paddock. My brother's hunting team had returned with wild chickens and mountain snakes, perfect for the 2 dragons playing with Phoenix stew that had driven everyone crazy last time. Uncle Six had set up 20 tables across the hilltop. The main table on the stone slab was reserved for the guests, Steward Way, the teenager, and our village elders as hosts. Grandpa Tion and second grandpa had borrowed Hawaiian shirts and beach shorts from my brother and me. They looked surprisingly stylish, just needed gold chains and sunglasses to complete the look. Lu San wore his scholar's robes with his hair pinned up by a vine twig, looking almost like a wandering sage. The teenager's eyes were glued to my brother the entire time. I nudged him toward the main table, reminding him that as head of the family he needed to host properly. He glanced toward the table, accidentally locked eyes with the teenager, and stammered agreement. Then he asked me to make a cold noodle dish, said it was too hot for soup noodles. I realized he was being unusually thoughtful. Normally he was oblivious to everything, but today he'd noticed the heat would bother the guests. Interesting. I changed the whole menu on the fly. I dumped ice into the fishbone broth to chill it, skimmed the fat, and added soy sauce for flavor. I had the crew blanch the noodles, then shock them in ice water to firm them up. Within minutes we had bowls of cold noodle soup topped with fish slices, shrimp, snail meat, sweet radish strips, pickled greens, and herbs. I tasted the first bowl. Perfect, cold, savory, refreshing. The crew picked up the technique instantly. Boil, ice bath, plate, pour cold broth. Like they'd been running a noodle shop for years. When I tried to carry 10 bowls to the main table on a tray, I couldn't even lift it. The kitchen women howled with laughter. Chonyang hip-checked me aside and carried it one-handed. The whole hilltop went silent except for the sound of slurping. People kept sending bowls back for refills. Steward Wei ate 3 or 4 bowls and finally worked up the nerve to ask for the recipe. My brother looked over at the teenager, who was happily eating with flushed cheeks, and agreed without even consulting me. I was already walking over with the recipe written out, along with the ice-making formula on the same sheet. Steward Wei was shocked at my generosity. I pointed at the pickle platters on the table and told him the truth. I'd invested everything into pickles and had no way to sell them. If his family could help me find buyers, that was all I needed in return. He understood immediately. The ice formula and cold noodle recipe were gifts. The Real ask was a trade partnership for the pickles. He studied me with new eyes, clearly revising his opinion of the brain-damaged younger brother. He said he'd need to discuss it with his master first and tried to return the paper. I pushed it back. I told him the ice recipe was his regardless. The pickle business was a separate matter. If it worked out, great. If not, no hard feelings. The piglet feast lasted until well past 2 in the afternoon. When it was over, Steward Wei and his group boarded a canopied boat on the Jing River. The teenager stood at the bow looking back toward our village. 2 days here had clearly left an impression. Steward Wei asked if the teenager, he called them, Yuner, wanted to come back and stay at the family's country estate sometime. The kids shook their head and said they wanted to come back to Shago village instead, then blushed and ran inside the boat cabin. The steward watched them go with a warm smile, then looked upstream and his expression hardened. He muttered to himself about the timing being wrong. The Wei family had just changed leadership and it wasn't the right moment for big moves. He liked the pickle business idea, but couldn't commit. I didn't hear any of this. I only learned about it later. What I did know, from my history book hidden under the bed, was what was happening on a much bigger stage. Right now, on the banks of the Wei River, Emperor Li Shimin was personally facing down the Turkic Khan Jieli with only 6 riders at his side. It was the most famous bluff in Chinese history. The Khan had sent an envoy named Sili to Chang'an to intimidate the new emperor, boasting about a 1,000,000-strong army at the gates. Li Shimin didn't flinch. He berated the envoy for breaking peace treaties, then imprisoned him instead of sending him back. After that, he rode out to the Wei River himself to stare down the entire Turkic army from the opposite bank. By August 29th, Tang reinforcements from across the empire were arriving. The Khan grew nervous. His spy hadn't returned with intelligence about Tang defenses, and the emperor himself had appeared without fear. He requested peace talks. Li Shimin agreed, not from weakness but strategy. His throne was new, his power not yet consolidated. Better to buy time. The Khan offered 3,000 horses and 10,000 sheep in exchange for his imprisoned envoy. Li Shimin was puzzled. Why was this one man so important? None of his advisors had an answer. After everyone left his tent, Li Shimin sat alone. Then a mysterious voice spoke from nowhere, as if from thin air. It explained that the envoy had been secretly cataloging Tang military strength during his visit. If the Khan learned that Chang'an only had 60,000 troops defending it, the peace talks would collapse. The voice suggested making the envoy believe Tang forces were far larger than they actually were, a deception within a negotiation. Li Shimin gripped his jade pendant until his thumb turned white. He was listening to a ghost, or an advisor so secret that even his closest ministers didn't know they existed. I knew none of the details happening in that tent, but I knew from my history book how it ended. The Treaty of the Wei River. The Turkic army would withdraw. Peace would hold long enough for Li Shimin to rebuild. And within a few years, the Tang dynasty would crush the Eastern Turkic Khanate entirely. The wheels of history were turning exactly on schedule. All I had to do was keep my little village fed and safe until the storm passed. I didn't witness any of what happened next. I was back in the village cleaning up after the feast. But I'd read enough of my history book to know the broad strokes, and the details I learned later filled in the rest. After Li Shimin consulted with that mysterious hidden advisor, he sent out a flurry of secret orders. General Duan Jishuan rode to Chang'an to collect thousands of sets of armor from different provincial armies, each with distinct markings identifying them as troops from Izhou, Luozhou, Yangzhou, and dozens of other regions. Meanwhile, General Ho Junji gathered the 60,000 imperial soldiers in a hidden valley and gave them bizarre instructions. 5,000 went to round up civilians from every village between the Wei River and Chang'an. Men, women, anyone who could walk except the very old and children under 10. Another 5,000 set up every spare tent the army had and lit campfires in front of each one. The remaining soldiers stripped off their armor and weapons, left everything in camp, and marched naked to a mountain called Qixia to wait. The civilians were terrified, thinking they'd be used as cannon fodder. But the Chancellor Feng Xianling calmed them down. All they had to do was put on armor, walk around the camp looking like soldiers for one night, and go home the next morning with a bag of grain as payment. Once they had helmets on, you couldn't tell a farmer from a veteran at any distance. At Qixia Mountain, the real soldiers started a grueling rotation. They'd put on Izhou armor, march to camp as Izhou reinforcements, set up tents and light fires, then sneak back to the mountain in the dark, change into Luozhou armor, and march back as a completely different army. They did this over and over all night, creating the illusion of a massive stream of provincial armies pouring in from across the empire. The final piece was the Turkic envoy, Sili, still locked in a Chang'an dungeon. Li Shimin's brother-in-law Changsun Wuji came to release him. The Khan had offered 3,000 horses and 10,000 sheep for his return. They put him in an open-topped cart and drove him north toward the Tang camp. Along the way, coincidentally, column after column of torch-bearing soldiers marched past in the darkness, each wearing different provincial armor. Changsun Wuji casually remarked on each one. "Oh, Izhou's troops arrived fast, then. Luozhou is slower than I expected." The envoy sat in his cart, drenched in cold sweat, watching what he believed were tens of thousands of elite reinforcements streaming in from every corner of the empire. By the time he reached camp, he'd counted at least 50,000 fresh troops, all fake. The same 4,000 soldiers marching in circles, plus farmers in borrowed helmets. They put him on a high observation platform for the night. Sili thought they were stupid. From up there he could survey the entire camp and count their real strength. He had no idea that everything he was about to see had been staged specifically for his eyes. The greatest con in Tang Dynasty history was underway, and I was 40 miles away washing dishes. August 30th. I burned my copy of the Tang Dynasty chronology in the yard fire. I'd memorized everything I needed, and keeping it around was too risky. According to what I'd read, today was the day of the Treaty of the Wei River. The greatest bluff in Chinese history had worked perfectly. Li Shimin's people had spent the entire night cycling the same soldiers through different sets of provincial armor, marching them past the Turkic envoy's observation platform over and over. By morning, the envoy was convinced the Tang had 300,000 troops when they really had 60,000 plus a bunch of farmers in borrowed helmets. When they released the envoy back to the Khan, he was a broken man. He swore on the wolf god that fighting was suicide. The Khan agreed to peace talks. I didn't witness any of it. I was at home, watching Ruhui waddle through the gate hugging a clay jar almost as big as she was, her monster tail swinging behind her. I grabbed the jar before she tripped. Inside were fat, hairy river crabs, legs covered in fine fuzz, shells dark and round. Ruhui said she'd caught one herself. The rest were gifts from the village boys Dainyu and Urgu. I flipped one over. Round belly, female. Perfect timing. It was the last day of the 8th lunar month, right when female crabs are at their fattest and most flavorful, their roe fully developed. I'd been living here for over 10 days and somehow never eaten crab. Chonyang had been setting aside the big shrimp and loaches for me and letting the kids have the crabs as snacks. What a waste of premium ingredients. I sent Ruhui to fetch Dainyu and Urgu. She made me promise not to eat any while she was gone, then ran off with her little crab still clutched in one hand. Meanwhile, 40 li away on the Wei River, the treaty ceremony was happening. A white horse was led onto the bridge spanning the river. General Yuchi Jingda, still carrying my machete, stepped forward and took the horse's head off with a single swing. The blade cut through the thick neck clean, spraying blood across the wooden planks and into the water below. Both the Khan and his brother flinched and wiped sweat from their foreheads. Even Li Shimin was stunned for a moment before his soldiers cheering snapped him out of it. The emperor looked at the bowl of horse blood mixed with wine that a palace maid handed him. He grimaced. Normally you just add a few drops for ceremony, but Yuchi Jingda's enthusiastic decapitation had turned his wine into a solid red soup. He glanced at the general, sighed, raised the bowl toward the Khan across the bridge, and drank it all. The treaty was signed. The Turkic army agreed to withdraw. The Khan would deliver 3,000 horses and 10,000 sheep as tribute. I knew none of the ceremony details at the time. I was squatting in my yard sorting crabs by size, planning a feast. The war was over. Peace had come, exactly on schedule. Now the real work could begin. September 1st. I woke up and the world had changed overnight. The Turkic army had withdrawn. News traveled fast. It was only about 20 li to where the treaty had been signed, and by morning the whole region knew. My mother celebrated by tying Ruhui's hair into a towering sky-high ponytail with a red ribbon she'd been hiding who knows how long. Combined with the monster costume, my sister looked like a tiny Godzilla with an antenna. The braid was half a meter tall, making her look 50 centimeters taller and wobbling dangerously with every step. Everyone at the East Hill was singing and laughing. Chonyang brought me noodle soup and asked if we should start selling at the county market now that it was reopening. I told her not yet. We had valuable recipes, steamed buns, pickles, and showing up too flashy too soon would attract the wrong kind of attention. Without a powerful backer, we'd be easy targets. Second Grandpa and Grandpa Tian agreed. Anything worth stealing needed to stay quiet. That's when I looked over at Lu San in the schoolhouse and got an idea. I called him over and asked if he knew what a newspaper was. He didn't. I asked about storybooks. He didn't know those either. He explained that paper itself was expensive. 90% of all quality paper was produced by noble families, and even the government lost money trying to make its own. Printing existed in a basic form called woodblock printing, where you carved text into wooden boards. I filed away the paper problem for later. The shop could sell me a paper-making manual for 88 yuan whenever I needed it. What I wanted right now was simpler. I asked Lu San to write down a story as I told it. He'd handle the literary polish while I provided the plot. I offered him 10 won per 1,000 characters, with all writing supplies provided free. He asked how long the story would be. I looked up at the sky, thought about two butterflies dancing in the air, and said, at least 100,000 characters. His jaw dropped. The villagers around us started doing math out loud. 100,000 characters at 10 won per thousand. That was a fortune for a country scholar. The story I had in mind was The Butterfly Lovers, one of China's most famous love stories, set in the Eastern Jin dynasty. A girl named Zhu Yingtai disguises herself as a boy to attend school, where she falls in love with her classmate Liang Shanbua. They study together for 3 years. She loves him deeply, but he never realizes she's a woman. When she's forced to go home and is betrothed to another man's son, Liang Shanbua finally learns the truth. He's too poor and too late. He dies of heartbreak. On her wedding day, Yingtai visits his grave. It splits open, she leaps in, and they transform into butterflies, dancing together forever. I couldn't just buy a modern text and have Lu Xun copy it. The language had to match what Tang Dynasty readers expected. So I tell the story in my own words, and Lu Xun would translate my clumsy narration into proper literary prose. Now I just had to figure out the best format to publish it, something like a newspaper or more like a serialized magazine. Which would suit ancient readers better? I didn't know any of this at the time. I only pieced it together much later. Steward Wei brought my ice-making formula and cold noodle recipe back to his master in Chang'an, a man living in Chongren Ward, the most exclusive neighborhood in the capital, where only officials could afford property. The master's name was Wei Zheng. Yes, that Wei Zheng. The most famous advisor in Tang Dynasty history. The man who would spend his career telling Emperor Li Shimin exactly what he didn't want to hear, submitting over 200 blunt criticisms that the emperor accepted every single one of. But right now he was still a minor official, having just switched his loyalty to the new emperor after backing the losing side in the succession struggle. Wei Zheng slammed his teacup on the table and called Steward Wei foolish. Using a child's gift as a wedding dowry for his daughter's marriage into the royal family? Beneath the Wei family's dignity. The ice-making trick was clever but cheap. Once explained, anyone could do it. Instead, he'd present it directly to the emperor as a tribute. Li Shimin needed good publicity after the Turkic crisis, and a method for making summer ice would generate exactly the right kind of buzz. Then Wei Zheng picked up the paper I'd written the recipes on, and his expression changed completely. He held it next to imperial-grade paper and special Xianzhou tribute paper. My paper was better than both. Whiter, smoother, sturdier. He told the steward. The boy wrote 2 recipes on one sheet, as if they were trivial. But the paper itself was the real message. By handing over that paper, I was telling them I had access to paper-making technology superior to anything in the empire, and I was willing to deal. The steward went pale, remembering my innocent smile. Then a door burst open and a young voice yelled, "Father, you ate my pickled celery again." It was the teenager from the village, Wei Zheng's daughter. Her name was Wei Shuyun. She'd already gone through half the jar of spicy vinegar celery my brother had given her, and her father had been sneaking the rest. Wei Zheng couldn't even get angry at his own daughter. She demanded that Steward Wei hide her remaining pickles under her bed where her father couldn't reach them. Then she reminded the steward about his promise to take her back to Shago village on their next day off. Wei Zheng composed himself and told the steward to send someone to buy more pickles from us, and to deliver a message. The paper is good, for words. That was all I'd need to hear. It meant he understood what I was offering, and he was interested. He left the room before his daughter could scold him further about the celery. The steward went to walk her to her calligraphy lesson, then stopped at the door, frowning. What did the master tell me to go say to the boy? He'd forgotten the rest of the message. Wei Shuyan had distracted him completely. September had arrived. The hillside near the village was covered in golden chrysanthemums. I stood there thinking about a poem by the rebel Huang Chao, a man who failed the imperial exams and wrote about flowers killing all other flowers. Talent gets buried in every era. I'd completely overhauled my supply system by now. Instead of pretending to go to town with my brother every time I needed goods, I'd set up 10 hidden drop points in caves and valleys within 5 li of the village. I'd ride out on horseback like I was practicing, buy everything from the shop at one of the drop points, mark it, and the next day Dashin would take a horse cart to pick it up. Much smoother than before. Today's shipment included something special, a bundle wrapped in cloth that I told Dashin to keep dry. Very important. Back on the East Hill, I went to the schoolhouse. Uncle Six was hunched over a workbench carving tiny characters into the tops of small wooden blocks. This was an old-fashioned woodblock printing where you carve a whole page onto one board. I'd skipped ahead by centuries and gone straight to movable type. Each block had one character, carved in mirror image. You arrange them into a page, ink them, press paper on top, then rearrange for the next page. Uncle Six said simple characters took him about 15 minutes, but complex ones could take half an hour. I told him to carve extra copies of common words like I, you, he, the, and is, since they'd repeat constantly. At 1 won per character. This was a huge job worth over 10 strings of cash. He wasn't complaining. Lu San had already organized a list of every character needed for the first chapters of our story. I hadn't even asked him to. He'd just done it. Having an educated person on my team made everything easier. He was desperate for the next installment. When I sat down to continue the story, I discovered why. A crowd of village women had gathered outside the schoolhouse door, including my mother and Chonyang. They'd all gotten hooked on the butterfly lovers and weren't leaving until they heard what happened next. Yesterday, I'd left off at a cliffhanger where Liang Shanbua fainted after being kept awake all night. The women were arguing about whose fault it was. Most of them already hated the character Zhu Yingtai for causing trouble, which was hilarious since she was the heroine. I told the next section, a famous female scholar comes to lecture. The villain Ma Wenkai insults all women and organizes a class boycott, and Liang Shanbua and Zhu Yingtai scheme to force him back. That part got the women cheering. An hour later, Dashin arrived with my special package. I unwrapped it in front of Lu San. It was a roll of newsprint paper, grayish, lightweight, slightly rough, perfect for absorbing ink. Cheaper and more practical than the fine white paper I'd used for the recipe. Lu San ran his fingers over it in wonder. He asked what we were actually going to print. Just the butterfly lovers. I shook my head. The love story was only one section. I was creating something bigger, a magazine with multiple features, stories, news, practical tips, maybe even advertisements for our pickles. I'd already picked the name. I was going to call it Jean, Soulmate. I did the math on the magazine business. One roll of newsprint cost me 150 yuan and could print about 800 copies of Jean. At 21 per copy, that was 16,000 won back, roughly 16 strings of cash, which the shop would convert to 16,000 yuan. Pure profit on almost nothing. I needed my brother to escort Uncle Six to Chang'an for the toilet building job, so I went looking for him. My mother said he was probably out riding again. I decided to take my own horse Baifeng for a ride too. My brother had been galloping through the forest on lightning, but the trees were too dense for a proper run, so he'd headed for the main road. That's where things went wrong. He flew past a horse-drawn carriage at full speed, spooking their horses. Someone inside bumped their head. A big, dark-skinned, mean-looking young man jumped out furious. My brother tried to apologize, but he accidentally used a word I'd taught him, sheet, which sounded like he was threatening to hit the guy. The man was named Cheng Chumu, clearly a rich official's son with bodyguards. He ordered his men to beat my brother with sticks. 3 guards charged in. My brother pulled Frostmourne off his back, and in 3 flashes, all their sticks were cut in half. They stood there holding stumps. Cheng Chumu drew his sword and swung. My brother parried once, and the sword snapped, the broken blade spinning through the air and sticking in the grass at the guy's feet. "What kind of weapon is that?" Cheng Chumu asked, suddenly much more polite. "It's called Frostmourne," my brother answered. The name meant absolutely nothing to anyone present. Cheng Chumu decided to let it go. My brother was about to leave peacefully when Baifeng smelled lightning nearby and bolted straight out of the forest with me on top, screaming for my life. I'd been peacefully eating drunken crab on horseback when my horse suddenly went crazy. The 2 horses reunited, rubbing necks happily while I slid off Baifeng's back, clutching my jar of crab and checking it hadn't spilled. I looked up and saw my brother standing next to an angry stranger with a broken sword at his feet. I bowed politely and called the man Uncle. He was maybe 20 years old. A silvery laugh burst from inside the carriage. The curtain pulled back and a girl peeked out. And for one insane second, I could have sworn she looked exactly like a celebrity from my past life. Chunyuchi, I blurted out. She tilted her head. "You know me?" I stood there with crab sauce on my chin, completely frozen. The girl asked if I knew her. I wiped my eyes and looked again. Not actually the celebrity from my old life. Just maybe 70 or 80% similar. Maybe even prettier. I said I'd mistaken her for someone else. But her brother Cheng Chumu exploded, pointing his broken sword at me and accusing me of being some stalker who'd staged this whole encounter to get close to his sister. My brother drew Frostmourne and stepped in front of me. The girl jumped down from the carriage and waved her brother off. She pointed out that I'd called out Chen Yuchi while their family name was Chung, obviously a mistake. She gave me the perfect exit and I grabbed it, babbling about a friend who looked just like her. Everyone stared at me like I was an idiot. Even my brother. Cheng Chumu told us to get lost and informed me he was 18, not an uncle. He was turning to leave when his sister stopped him. She'd caught the smell from the clay jar I was carrying. Her eyes locked onto it like a hawk spotting prey. She started tugging his sleeve, begging him to ask what was inside. He marched back over, embarrassed, and asked about my jar. It was drunken crab, river crabs I'd marinated in rice wine and spices for days. I'd been snacking on them during my ride. I offered the whole jar. Cheng Chumu hesitated, suspicious of food from a stranger. So I opened the jar, pulled out a fat female crab, and called my brother over to split it. My brother cracked it open. Rich orange oozed out. He was supposed to give me half, but instead shoved both pieces into his mouth at once. A scream nearly shattered my eardrums. The girl was staring at her brother with murder in her eyes. His suspicion had just cost her a crab. I laughed, walked past Cheng Chumu, and handed the whole jar to her. If you like it, take them all. Don't cry. She grabbed the jar, peeked inside at the remaining crabs, and her face lit up. When I told her I could make more, she locked eyes with me and said, "You promised. No takebacks." Her brother shoved her back onto the carriage, glaring at me like I'd just stolen something. As the cart started moving, she pulled back the curtain one more time, cheeks pink, and asked where I lived. 3 Li East, Wei Family Estate, Xiago Village. My name is Shi Yunfei. She smiled. Don't forget what you said. The curtain dropped. Her brother whipped the horses, and they disappeared down the road in a cloud of dust. I stood there staring after them like an idiot until my brother reached for my forehead. I dodged. He told me to look at the family crest on the carriage. That was the household of General Cheng, as in Cheng Yaojin, one of the most powerful military commanders in the entire Tang dynasty. That girl was way above our station. I grinned. Cheng Yaojin's daughter. Perfect, I said. Absolutely perfect. I had no idea any of this was happening. I was back in the village, going about my day. But the wheels I'd set in motion with that single sheet of paper had reached the very top. Wei Zheng brought my pickles to the imperial palace and set them before Emperor Li Shimin himself. The emperor didn't want to try them. Pickles were just salty emergency food in his mind. Wei Zheng told him to taste them. He did. 1 bite of sour lotus root, then spicy radish, then more, and more. He emptied every dish without stopping, the sound of crunching filling the great hall. When the plates were clean, he was still hungry for more. Wei Zheng explained the business. Each jar sold for 30 when at market. I was offering a 30% discount, and I had at least 10,000 jars ready. He described the fish jerky too, 8 different flavors, each suited for different purposes. The emperor was skeptical about the fish until he dipped his finger in the leftover pickle juice and tasted it. Li Shimin decided to put the pickle trade under the Eastern Palace's management. He waived the 30% profit share I'd offered and asked for pickles delivered to the palace instead. Taxes still had to be paid. He wasn't going to let anyone accuse him of favoritism. He called me a kid playing at business and said to let me do as I pleased. As for the ice-making formula, the emperor initially dismissed it. Autumn had arrived, and the north didn't need ice anymore. But Wei Zheng pointed out that the southern provinces were still sweltering. Distributing this technique to Lingnan and Jiangnan would let people in remote regions feel the emperor's generosity. It would be perfect propaganda for a new ruler who needed goodwill. Li Shimin loved the idea. He even complimented Wei Zheng's brilliance, then couldn't resist jabbing him about having once served the previous crown prince, the one Li Shimin had killed to take the throne. Wei Zheng fired back without blinking. If the former prince had listened to my advice, today wouldn't have happened. The emperor slammed the table in fury. Wei Zheng stared right back. They locked eyes for a full minute before Li Shimin backed down first. Then he asked about Wei Zheng's daughter's upcoming wedding to the 14th prince. He offered to attend personally with the empress. Wei Zheng, who'd just been openly defiant, melted instantly at this honor. After Wei Zheng left, Li Shimin sat alone holding my sheet of paper. Then he spoke to the empty room. Kaishan, your boy has sent me quite the gift, a hoarse voice answered from behind the bookcase. My father, Shi Kaishan, alive, hidden inside the imperial palace, serving as some kind of secret advisor to the emperor. The mysterious voice that had helped plan the great bluff against the Turkic Khan. That had been him too. Li Shimin offered to grant me a noble title, a county lord, or even a founding county duke based on my father's secret service record. My father refused. He asked the emperor to treat me as an ordinary citizen and forget about him. The emperor pushed back. He said my brother's martial talent was being wasted out of the army, and now my own abilities rivaled the ancient sage Songjie who invented writing. Was my father really going to bury both his sons in obscurity? Silence from behind the bookcase. Li Shimin sighed. Fine, let the boy play. But a tree that grows taller than the forest will be broken by the wind. You're letting a 14-year-old be watched by wolves, and you don't seem to care. My father said nothing. I knew none of this. I was in my village sorting crabs and telling love stories to village women. I didn't know my father was alive, didn't know he was hiding behind the emperor's bookshelf, and didn't know he'd just refused to let me be protected, leaving me exposed to whatever powerful people might come circling. 3 days after Steward Wei left, still no word about the pickle deal. I stood at the workshop door staring at the village entrance, worried. My warehouse was filling up fast, and if I couldn't sell this stuff, even the pigs wouldn't eat it. My brother and Dashin came back from hunting with a pile of wild chickens and rabbits. I was eyeing dinner when Annie Hua shouted to stop them from killing one, a hen with an injured wing. She said it probably wouldn't survive the night, but it gave me an idea. Why not raise wild chickens? Like the pigs, catch them alive, feed them, collect eggs, breed them. My brother called me an idiot. Wild chickens were too fast to catch alive, he said. This injured one was pure luck. But I remembered something from elementary school, a passage by the writer Lu Sun about his friend Runtu catching birds in winter. You sweep a patch of ground, prop up a big basket with a stick, scatter grain underneath, and when the birds walk in to eat, you pull the string and the basket drops. I sent Dashin to the dining hall for bamboo winnowing baskets and rope. Then I ran to the reed flats between the East Hill and Mulan Creek, prime wild chicken territory, and secretly bought a bag of poultry feed from the shop for 22 yuan. I stuffed my pockets full and hid the rest under some rocks. When everyone arrived, I showed them the setup. Tie a string to a stick, prop up a basket with the stick, scatter feed underneath. When a chicken walks in, pull the string. The basket drops. Done. They all looked at me like I was insane. My brother said one arrow was faster. Debeo was bored within 15 minutes. Chonyang wanted to know what I'd scattered as bait. Then we heard clucking from the reeds. 2 wild chickens appeared, pecking their way along the trail of feed toward Dashin's basket, completely oblivious. My brother's basket started shaking first. He'd pulled his string and caught one. The amazing thing was, the other chickens didn't even run. They just kept eating. One by one, all 5 baskets caught chickens. Debeo somehow got 2 in one basket. In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea, we had 6 live wild chickens. I sent Dashin running to the East Hill with the birds and Debeo to get his father to build a chicken coop next to the pig pen. Chonyang ran back for more baskets, eyes shining. When Dashin arrived at the hilltop holding 6 flapping chickens, 3 in each hand, the whole village erupted. People were shouting about what a genius I was. Then someone mentioned their cousin's neighbor's niece who was supposedly very pretty and had nice wide hips, wondering if I was interested. I pretended not to hear that last part. September 3rd. The Treaty of the Wei River was only days old, but life was already returning to normal across the empire. The living kept busy. The dead lived only in memory. A stranger rode into the village today, a scruffy young man around 20 on a tired horse. Turned out he was a postal courier named Lu Fei, delivering a letter from the Wei mansion in Chang'an. I nearly laughed when I heard his name. Mine was Shi Yunfei, his was Lu Fei. Both had fly in them. But more important than his name was his job. He told me the Tang postal system had 1,639 relay stations across the entire empire, staffed by over 20,000 people, handling land routes, water routes, and both. Every county had postal coverage. I almost fell off my chair. This wasn't just a mail service. It was a nationwide distribution network, ready-made. Every station was a potential sales point. I'd been planning to haul my products to the county market myself. Now I could sit at home and reach the whole country. I fed Lu Fei the best meal he'd ever had. Fruit wine, chicken legs, steamed buns, the works. He was sharp enough to know I wanted something. After he couldn't eat another bite, he told me to just ask. I waved Lu Sen over. He brought a stack of freshly printed copies of our magazine, Jean. Each issue was 6 pages of thin newsprint, light as a feather. The front section had the latest chapters of The Butterfly Lovers. The back pages had local interest stories and, tucked in the corner, an advertisement. Yushi pickles, limited supply. Delicious and affordable, fair dealing guaranteed. I asked Lu Fei to deliver 1 free copy along with each letter he carried today. 20 copies, 20 households. All free. He flipped to the back and saw the suggested retail price, 21. He was skeptical. A proper book might sell for that, but a little story pamphlet? I told him not to worry about sales. Just deliver them. And I loaded him up with 30 steamed buns for the road. He left happy. I was ecstatic. Those 20 free copies were seeds. Once people read the first chapters of the love story and hit the cliffhanger ending, they'd be desperate for the next issue. That's when the money would start flowing. Then I opened the letter from Steward Way. 2 pages. The message was everything I'd hoped for. The emperor himself had tasted our pickles and loved them. 300 jars per month would go to the imperial palace as tribute, basically protection money, but I didn't mind. Anyone who tried to mess with our business would have to answer to the emperor's appetite. The remaining 200 jars were a direct purchase by the Wei family, with special emphasis on extra vinegar celery and sweet garlic. My first real sale. I told Dashin to have my mother prepare 500 jars by tomorrow noon, starting with the oldest batches. I also ordered 5 jars of drunken crab, sent to the Wei mansion as a gift, under my brother's name, addressed to Young Master Wei. That was for Wei Shuyun, the girl my brother still thought was a boy, and 5 more jars to General Cheng's household, addressed to Chung Yuchi, under my own name. A promise was a promise. Finally, I grabbed Lu San and told him to print every remaining sheet of newsprint into magazines immediately. I was certain that within 3 days, those 20 free copies would generate demand we couldn't keep up with. He was nervous. What if people hated his writing? I squeezed his shoulder and told him that soon every literate person in the Tang dynasty would know the name Lu San. He'd be charging 10 liang just to write a couplet. He laughed, but I wasn't joking. I wasn't there for any of this. But Lu Fei told me the whole story later, and it was too good not to remember. After leaving our village, Lu Fei spent the afternoon finishing his mail deliveries. He handed out 19 copies of Jean along the way. Nobody refused a free booklet. Even women who couldn't read grabbed them because anything printed on paper had value. By the time he reached his 19th delivery, the wine had worn off, and he realized what he'd done. He'd given away 19 copies of something he actually wanted to keep. He'd been reading the Butterfly Lover's story on horseback the whole ride and couldn't put it down. He arrived at the Jingyang postal station still clutching the last copy. His horse knew the way home and walked itself through the gate, while Lu Fei had his nose buried in the pages. He only stopped when his forehead smacked the doorframe. That's when his boss's boss's boss showed up, an old man called Manager Li, who spotted the magazine and confiscated it with casual authority. Lu Fei's heart sank. He'd just gotten to the good part. Manager Li took Jean to the station outhouse. He was the type who used soft paper instead of the standard wooden scraping sticks, and this booklet looked like it would make excellent material. But he started reading instead. He got hooked immediately. The girl disguised as a boy, the 2 students forced to share a bed, the villain Ma Wenkai acting like a pompous fool. He was so absorbed that when the story cut off at a cliffhanger, Liang Shanbua fainting from exhaustion, continued in the next issue, he tried to stand up in a rage. His legs had gone completely numb from squatting too long. He crashed back down onto the latrine pit and started screaming for help. Meanwhile, inside the station, Lu Fei had opened the bundle of steamed buns I'd given him. His co-workers gathered around. The squad leader, a man named Chui, picked up a crab meat bun and devoured it in 3 bites. His eyes went wide. He'd never tasted anything like it. Crab meat, crab roe, and a pocket of rich broth inside soft, fluffy bread. He slapped 10 copper coins on the table and took 10 buns. 1 won each, twice the price of regular steamed cakes. The other couriers started begging for their share too. Lu Fei gave everyone one bun for free and promised to make another run to our village tomorrow. Just as they were all taking their first bites, a crash and a scream came from the outhouse. Manager Lee, still trapped with numb legs, was howling for rescue. My little magazine had claimed its first victim. The next morning, before sunrise, horses appeared at the village entrance. Grandpa Tian was out weeding his garden and went to check. Through the mist, he saw 5 or 6 riders at the horse paddock gate. A gruff voice called him, "Old Tian," and demanded he wake me up. It was a man named Squad Leader Chui, the boss of all postal couriers at the Jingyang relay station. Lu Fei was with him, along with several other couriers. Grandpa Tian was terrified. Chui's son-in-law was the county deputy magistrate. I stumbled up to the East Hill half asleep, still cranky from staying up until 3 in the morning printing magazines with Lu San. My brother walked beside me looking alert. Lu Fei pulled me aside and handed me a purchase order written on a slip of paper. It was from Manager Lee, the old man who'd stolen Lu Fei's copy of Jean yesterday. The list read, 50 cabbage buns, 50 greens buns, 100 crab meat buns, 10 jars of pickled radish, and 1 copy of issue 2 of Jean. Lu Fei laid down a full string of 1,000 copper coins. At the prices he'd quoted, 20 won for the magazine, 30 won per pickle jar, 2 won for meat buns, 1 won for vegetable buns. The total was only 621. The manager had overpaid by nearly half. My brain stalled on something unexpected. I'd planned to sell pickles. I'd planned to sell the magazine. I'd even thought about selling wine. But it had never crossed my mind that steamed buns would have serious commercial demand. Then I noticed Squad Leader Chui's belly was suspiciously bulging under his shirt. He caught me looking and gave up pretending. He pulled out a bag of loose copper coins and asked if he could buy buns too. His relay station had an inn attached. Travelers stopped to eat and sleep. Buns would be perfect. I asked how many he wanted. However many you can make. I'll take them all. I told him vegetable buns at 1 won each, fish buns at 2, lamb at 5, and crab meat at 5, but requiring advance orders. We could produce several thousand vegetable buns per day. He raised an eyebrow, then sent his 3 men down the hill. They came back carrying 3 bundles. He dropped them on the table, the clink of metal on metal. 5,000 coins. 5 strings of cash. Now tell me, young man, can you make 5,000 buns or not? My brother and I looked at each other. This was no longer a village kitchen operation. This was a wholesale business deal, delivered to my doorstep before breakfast. The moment I had a 5,000 bun order, everything kicked into overdrive. I started barking instructions at everyone. I sent Dainyu and Ergu to catch crabs. Big ones only. 1 piece of white rabbit candy per crab, no limit. Grandpa Tian went into the mountains for wild mushrooms with strict orders to check for poison. My brother and Dashin went to the kitchen to help Chonyang knead dough instead of hunting. I checked with my mother that the 500 jars of pickles for the Wei family delivery were ready. Squad Leader Chui and his couriers sat at the dining hall eating breakfast. Their first time trying our millet porridge, steamed buns, and pickles combo. Lu Fei mentioned that our pickles went all the way to the Imperial Palace, which made Chui sit up straight. He tasted the pickles more carefully and declared them perfect for cutting through greasy food. Exactly what wealthy meat-eaters needed. He asked about becoming a distributor. His couriers traveled every road in Jingyang County daily. Why not sell pickles along the way? He proposed paying half up front and the rest after selling. I agreed before he even finished his sentence. Everyone froze. They'd expected haggling. I gave him a wholesale price of 28 won per jar, 2 won below retail. But I had a condition. I was running out of workers. Every able body in the village was already assigned somewhere. This morning's emergency bun order had nearly broken us. I needed Chui to recruit 50 laborers from surrounding villages. Men or women, honest country folk, no criminals, no sick people. Room, board, and 100 won monthly salary. Chui thought the pay was generous. Most people would work just for meals. He turned to his couriers and divided the recruitment among them, keeping most spots for himself. Everyone was happy. Even Lu Fei, an orphan raised on charity from neighbors, could think of a few people who'd helped him growing up and deserved the opportunity. I didn't mind Chui carving up the recruiting rights in front of me. That's how relationships work. He'd be more invested in the partnership if his own people were involved. Meanwhile, back at the Jingyang relay station, something wonderful was unfolding. Manager Lee, the old man who'd stolen Lu Fei's magazine and gotten stuck in the outhouse, had spent all night tormented by the cliffhanger ending. He couldn't sleep. At dawn, he opened the station door and found it mobbed. Horse carriages were lined up outside. Representatives from every prominent family in Jingyang County were crowding the entrance, all shouting at once. He demanded to know what was going on. A servant bowed and explained. His mistress hadn't slept all night because of a booklet delivered by a courier named Lu Fei. They'd come to demand answers. Manager Lee's eyebrow twitched. Lu Fei ruined your lady's reputation? Everyone panicked. No. It was a story, a magazine called Jean. Their ladies had read the first installment of The Butterfly Lovers, hit the cliffhanger, and been unable to sleep. They needed the next issue immediately. The old man's stern face softened when he realized a whole county of wealthy women were suffering the same agony he was. He wasn't alone. Come in, he said. Wait. There'll be news soon. My 20 free copies had done exactly what I'd planned. One night, and the entire county was hooked. I wasn't at the relay station for any of this, but Lu Fei and squad leader Chui told me everything afterward. When Chui and Lu Fei returned to the Jingyang station that morning with my goods, buns, pickles, drunken crab, and a handwritten preview of the next 2 chapters of The Butterfly Lovers for Manager Lee, they found a mob waiting outside. Representatives from every wealthy family in the county had shown up at dawn, all demanding the same thing. The next issue of Jean. Manager Lee was delighted with his preview manuscript and promised to keep it secret. He disappeared into his room to read it immediately. That left Lu Fei alone with a pack of angry household stewards. A man named Steward Zhang from a military family grabbed him and demanded the continuation. A rival named Steward Lu from a rich merchant family jumped in, waving 101, 5 times the magazine's retail price, and tried to buy Lu Fei's personal copy of the handwritten draft. Lu Fei had secretly copied a portion while Lu San was transcribing for Manager Lee. He'd planned to read it before bed, but now it had become the most valuable piece of paper in the county. Zhang countered with 201. Lu raised to 300. Before Lu Fei could decide who to offend, Manager Lee stormed out, told everyone to stop bullying his courier, and declared a fair auction. Highest bidder wins. The bidding exploded. 300. 400 from a family claiming ties to the powerful Li clan of San Yuan. 800 from Zhang, who emptied every coin he was carrying. Then Steward Lu slapped down a silver ingot. 1 liang, worth 1101. Lu Fei's face lit up. 1101 for something he'd scribbled in 20 minutes. Just as he was about to accept, a voice from the back of the crowd called out. 1501. From the Chung family estate. The room went silent. Everyone knew who the Chung family was. 20 free copies of a 6-page magazine, printed on cheap newsprint that cost me a fraction of a yuan. 2 days later, wealthy families were bidding 1501 for a handwritten draft of the next chapters. That was 75 times the cover price. Lucen had been worried nobody would like his writing. I wished he could have seen this.